of New York City and the co-chair at the Mayor's Commission on Art, Monuments, and Markers. And I'm joined here with my co-chair, Darren Walker. And I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction. We have a bunch of our commissioners here huddled on the side. We'll move the table out in a minute. But in order to see the PowerPoint, we've asked them to stand aside. They are going to introduce themselves momentarily. I wanted to just give a couple of notes on access. We have the testimony, once it gets started, will be up these stairs here. If you are, for those who cannot use the stairs, we have wireless mics. And we have wheelchair-compatible seating up in front. Also, we will have CART running. It's not running yet, but we're going to have transcription. And so if you want that, if somebody needs CART but can't see it, we have a couple of iPads for access. Okay. So thank you again, everybody, for coming. I'm going to run through a little bit of a slideshow to say sort of where we're at and what the commission is and what kind of work we've been doing so far. So this is a public hearing. Obviously, we're having one of these in each borough. We've had 2, and we have 2 more coming up. We're right in the middle of this process. We wanted to say just at the very beginning to sort of remind everybody in a way that controversies over monuments is not a new thing in New York City. So just in front of City Hall down the street here, there was a work of art commissioned, and it was called Civic Virtue. And it was controversial even by the time it was put up in the 1922. It remained controversial, actually got moved to City Hall, or to Borough Hall in Queens, and then out to Greenwood Cemetery. So it's these kind of conversations, these kind of controversies have been going on for a long time. This is nothing new. And this is also a national discussion. There's been stuff going on in the South. If you see the work on the left, that's the Robert E. Lee Monument in Charlottesville. On the right, and again, I apologize for it's kind of washed out, but the picture is of a sculpture of Mayor Rizzo in Philadelphia, which has become controversial. So this is going on in a lot of different cities. It is not unique to New York, nor is it unique to our particular moment in time. So because of that, the mayor formed this commission, and we invited Darren to co-chair and invited our commissioners. And the charge of the commission is an advisory commission on city art, monuments, and markers. Will advise the mayor on issues surrounding public art and historic monuments and markers on city-owned property. By the end of the year, the commission will propose non-binding guidelines to advise how the city should address monuments seen as inconsistent with the values of New York City. So just to say what a monument and a marker is, a monument on the left side of the screen, you see a monument to Joan of Arc. And on the right is a marker. It's a name of a park in Queens, which was named after a very popular educator around 75 years ago. So, and then to understand this process, we have a commission. The commission's going to make recommendations. Those commissions are handed over to the administration, to the mayor, et cetera. And that will be mayoral policy. So this will be a set of policies that are put in place to address issues in the future. Those policies will then, if there's a particular marker, let's say it's on Parks Department property, the Parks Department will make a recommendation about that work. And let's say there's some change that happens to the work, recontextualization or moving or whatever, then it still goes through the regular process, which is to go to a community board hearing and then to the Public Design Commission. We have the head of the Public Design Commission here. He'll introduce himself in a minute and say exactly what the Public Design Commission is. But just to be clear, there's this commission and there's the Public Design Commission. That's been in place since the late 19th century, and that is the final process. Okay? So we also wanted to just say, again, that this sort of discussion is going on all over this country. Here are some of the cities that are doing this same kind of process right now. And then we wanted to just give you a little insight about what we're talking about in the commission. And there are words that keep coming up over and over again in our discussions, and again, frankly, in the discussions we've been having with you in the public. And these have to do with historical accuracy, participation. You know, what is the participatory aspect? We have a participatory moment right here. Well, how does that fit into it? Inquiry into power, complexity. But also, I just wanted to ask now my co-chair, Darren Walker, to talk about some of the basic values that the Commission has been working with. I'm going to turn this computer around so you can see it.
So good morning, everyone. So I think for the Commission, as we began our deliberations, we decided that it would be important to craft a set of principles that should guide our conversations and ultimately the set of recommendations we make. And these guiding principles are for, first, inclusion. The notion that New York City is an inclusive city. Unlike many of the other places where we're seeing conversations in this country, New York has always been a city that is an inclusive city that welcomes people. And so we want people to feel comfortable and feel welcomed in our public spaces. A historical understanding. And that really for us has meant a respect for and an in-depth understanding of the nuances and in fact the contradictions of our history, and to not seek to in any way misrepresent history. Complexity, the notion that our history is complex. Our layered intersectional identities as New Yorkers is complex. And finally, that we need to reckon power. Power is in many ways manifest in the very idea of a statue, something on high, something that we are looking up to, something that we are admiring, respecting, idolizing, and that we need to understand that statues have been used to exert and as a manifestation of power. And we want to just put that into the larger context. Tom, I'm giving it back to you, I think.
Thank you very much. And we just have a couple more slides that we're going to be, oh, I'm sorry. You can, okay, all right. I don't think we actually have the possibility of doing much with the lights, but okay. So, just to say, the way that this has been discussed a lot in the press, et cetera, has been pretty much all or nothing. Like, what goes up and, I mean, what stays up and what comes down? And we just wanted to say that there's a lot of other possibilities besides simply something stays or something goes. And I just wanted to give a couple of examples around the country. For example, there could be an art intervention or an artistic project. An artist named Edgar Heapwords has been doing a project for years that simply is signs that say, here's the nation that resided in this particular place historically. There are other monuments that could be added. There's a picture up of Harriet Tubman up in Harlem. It's a work that was commissioned for that great architect of the Underground Railroad. There are different kinds of temporary things that can happen as well. There's our great artist in residence at the Department of Sanitation who has done amazing work around giving credit to the sanitation workers of New York City. And one of the things she did was create a sanitation truck covered with mirrors, which drives through the city. I don't know if anybody's seen it. And you see your reflection in it. So it's a way of saying to sanitation workers, you know, thank you, this is what she's often said to, you know, for your great service to New York City, but also the reflection, like that garbage inside there is your garbage. See the reflection in the truck. That is some kind of a reflection on the great work that sanitation workers do. So that's another kind of monument. There can be different kinds of new institutions. There's the Museum of Jewish Heritage downtown, which really calls itself a monument to the Holocaust. That is an institution related to the history. There are educational programs. We've been talking to DOE about how curriculums could teach history and using monuments to teach history, et cetera. And then finally, there can be also temporary artworks that just simply give voice to people. There's an artist who did a project where he asked people to speak and then put their words up in large, like if we did a project today with this audience and your testimony was put up in huge words in public, that kind of stuff. So I just wanted to say, It's not just an all or nothing proposition. There are many other kinds of options which are temporary works or permanent works or counter institutions, etc. Okay, the hearing format is a traditional hearing format. We're going to sit down now, and you guys are going to be talking to us for the next several hours. If you haven't yet signed up, we have a sign up for testimony. Testimony will be 3 minutes long. We'll have a timekeeper, which will, right over here, you'll be able to see clearly how much time you have left. And then there'll be a very unsubtle, very loud beep. Will say that your time is up, and then really a sentence or two after that is what we hope. Just wrap it up at that point. If you have testimony that you want to hand to us and give to the commissioners, Nadia over here can take your testimony, we'll copy it, we'll give it out to the commissioners. So if you have written testimony, you can do that as well. Okay, have I missed anything, my folks? What's that? Online survey, yes. Oh, okay, by the way, there's 2 more coming up. You can go online to nyc.gov/monumentscommission. And we wanted to say that there is an online survey. We've already gotten a couple of thousand people have sent in their opinions. And that is, again, at that same website, nyc.gov/monumentscommission. So with that, we move the table over. Our commissioners will sit down, and we're going to have our commissioners introduce themselves. So let's go up on stage. So, yep. Okay, if we can start down at the, are we have enough chairs? We're good? Okay. Okay, as Gonzalo gets himself ready, why don't you, Justin, if you could start. We're going to have the commissioners introduce themselves.
I'm Justin Moore. I am an urban designer by background and expertise, and I serve in the mayor's office as the executive director of the Public Design Commission. The Design Commission is formerly known as the Art Commission, and it's the city agency that has the jurisdiction over the design of our public realm, public buildings, art on city property. So our 11-member commission, they have different backgrounds. It's an interdisciplinary body, architects, artists, et cetera, that they review the design, and that includes the alteration or potentially removal of public art, and including monuments and markers.
Thank you. Go back to Gonzalo.
Gonzalo Casals. I've been working in museums for over 2 decades. I'm currently the director of the Les Loma Museum for Gay and Lesbian Art, and I also teach arts, culture, and public policy at Hunter College.
My name is Audra Simpson. I'm a professor of anthropology at Columbia University. I'm a scholar of indigenous politics and history, along with settler colonial societies. I'm currently writing a book on the relationship between governance and affect in settler societies, and I'm a Mohawk from Kahnawake.
Hi, I'm Harriet Senny. I direct the master's program in art history and museum studies at City College and teach at the Graduate Center. I've written a couple of books on public art, one on memorials, one on controversy, and after the last election, I started an initiative called Teachable Monuments as a possible way of embedding monuments in school curricula and enabling us to have a conversation that will cross the so-called silos. Obviously, that's become much more urgent in recent times.
Good morning. My name is Mabel Wilson. I'm a professor of architecture at Columbia University. I'm also the associate director of the Institute for Research in African American Studies. And the focus of my practice, which is both scholarly and design, looks at African American culture, race, and the built environment. Most recently, I published Begin with the Past, which is building the Smithsonian's National African American Museum. And I'm currently on a design team that's designing the memorial for enslaved laborers at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville.
Good morning. I'm Darren Walker, and I serve as president of the Ford Foundation. I also chair the National Trust for Historic Preservation's African American Heritage Fund, which is committed to recognizing historic markers and memorials and monuments in recognition of African American history and heritage and culture in the United States.
Thank you. I've already introduced myself. I'm the Commissioner of Cultural Affairs. My name is Tom Finkelpearl, but I also would say that I do have a background in public art. I wrote a book called Dialogues in Public Art, so I have thought a lot about it over the years, and very happy to be co-chairing this commission. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is John Campbelli. I'm the Executive Vice President for the Wildlife Conservation Society. I'm also the Chair of the Cultural Institutions Group. I haven't said this often, but I am also a second-generation Italian-American. My parents were immigrants, and one of the things that I'm most proud of, and I think my parents are proudest of, is that I was knighted by the President of Italy for my efforts and the efforts of our community to promote strong U.S.-Italy dialogue.
My name is Jack Chen. I'm a professor at New York University. I'm a historian, curator, focused a lot on Chinatown and the history of the Chinese Exclusion Act. In fact, the only reason I was born was because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, but that's a longer story. I've also looked a lot at the history of the Lower East Side and the communities that have been actually missing and disappeared from history, including their archives and stories. So the questions that we're raising here are actually very important to me. I'm a co-founder of the Museum of Chinese in America, and also very much concerned about public displays and public history and public humanities.
Hello, my name is Michael Arad. I'm an architect practicing here in New York City. Very interested in the shared public realm that we have, and I was fortunate to design the 9/11 memorial at Lower Manhattan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So Nadia, can I have the first three? Thank you very much. So we're going to call people up in threes. What's that? Okay. And we'll just start on top. Okay. So Connor Tomas, Savonia Bailey McLean, and Yates McGee, if you could come up. You are the first panel, and you'll be speaking in that order, if we can. Yeah. Okay, we'll just go left to right here. And again, you're going to have 3 minutes. The timer is right there on the right. Okay, so and speak right into the microphone, please.
Your left or my left?
I'm sorry, you're first, yes. And again, if you could bring the mic right up close.
Good morning to this commission.
Oh, I'm sorry, if we could start the clock over again. There's one other thing I'm supposed to say. So the hearing format is we don't want to have people clapping or booing or anything like that. If you want to express your appreciation, the tradition is to do the clap like that. That's acceptable completely. But again, please no exclamations or clapping. Thank you very much. Okay, you're up.
Good morning. My name is Connor Tomas Reed. My parents were born and raised in the Bronx by their Puerto Rican and Irish immigrant families. I've lived in New York for over half of my life. I teach writing composition at the City University of New York to a majority working class Black, Latinx, Asian, and Middle Eastern student body. With my students, colleagues, and neighbors, I explore how the city is socially composed on a daily basis by the actions of the people in it, over time and across different relations of power. We then compose texts to reflect and further shape these social dynamics. Nothing is set in stone. The city changes according to what we do within it. We're gathered here so that this Commission on City Art, Monuments, and Markers can hear suggestions from the diverse peoples of New York. I wish to register opposition to 3 particular monuments that should be permanently removed immediately: the Christopher Columbus statue in Columbus Circle, the Theodore Roosevelt statue outside the American Museum of Natural History, and the J. Marion Sims statue in Central Park. These 3 monuments serve as daily reminders of colonialism, indigenous genocide, and white supremacist eugenics. That they are familiar landmarks in the city shows just how much we have inured ourselves to the horrors that they celebrate. Multiple organizations that comprise the diverse peoples of New York have demanded the removal of these 3 statues: the American Indian Community House, Black Youth Project 100, Chinatown Arts Brigade, Decolonize This Place, Eagle and Condor Community Center, New York Stands with Standing Rock, South Asia Solidarity Initiative, and more. I am proud to count my students, colleagues, and neighbors among them. In the process, we have composed proposals and artistic interventions for alternative monuments to take their place. We have acted with the shared belief that no bigotries are set in stone. Our efforts to intervene in the symbolic power of our city's monuments occur in a broader national context, whose political winds suggest that New York City is far behind the rest of the country. Dozens of cities have changed the name of Christopher Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. Even though we have amassed a petition with almost 20,000 signatures to do the same here, the mayor has so far ignored this appeal. In Durham, Baltimore, and other cities, denizens and city officials have removed similar racist statues. In a time of rising white supremacist violence, from Charlottesville to the White House, this commission's recommendations towards restorative justice can positively alter our city as well as the broader directions of the country. In this pivotal moment, does the commission and mayoral officials who gather here want to be remembered as a group that dedicated public time and resources to apply cosmetic changes, or at worst, did nothing at all? Or can this commission and mayor's office set a brave precedent by urging that our city's monuments commemorate the best of our communities and not their worst? If the commission and mayor's office make the peaceful removal of these despicable monuments impossible, then you make their forceful removal inevitable. Let's start this healing process with the removal of the Columbus, Roosevelt, and Sims statues. Thank you.
Okay, next.
Good morning. My name is Savannah Bailey McLean, and I am the Executive Director and Chief Curator for the West Harlem Art Fund, a small public arts organization that will celebrate its 20th anniversary this January. Thank you for allowing me to testify. As we examine the creation and importance of public monuments, we need to refer back to the city beautification movement and Gilded Age in New York City. The motivations at that time was to address overcrowded tenements, increased immigration and migration of poor and displaced populations from rural America. Many at that time believed such populations were decaying the moral fabric of this city. Then there was the fear of American cities of receiving second-class status to European cities. More parks and public plazas were developed to inspire or enliven the masses and bring some social order, but to whose real benefit did they really, satisfy? The wealthy class was never very concerned with inclusion. Fostering their own belief systems was really paramount. Yet, in spite of these limiting views, our public monuments should not be destroyed or simply hidden away. A broader narrative that befits more accurate data must be developed. And I have these recommendations to present to the committee. 1, broaden the definition of public art that's fitting to the 21st century, that includes sound, flora, digital, and interactive installations as a part of that definition, and educate the public to this broadened definition, which is more democratic. 2, rotation of some permanent sculptural works that seem to be very offensive to museum grounds, private plazas, and botanical gardens to help tell a broader narrative that is more historically accurate and allows space for new public art. 3, more interagency cooperation to approve more permanent public art, which includes parks, bridges, viaducts, tunnels, and abandoned structures along our waterways like pilings, old piers, and buildings. Half the time it seems like citizens are fighting their own city to realize public benefits. 3, increase resources for conservation of permanent public art. That also includes digital archiving, online exhibitions, and even virtual reality. And if there were more agency cooperation, more of this could be realized. 2% for public art. I think it's time that we have that. Offer corporate incentives to fund public art like Fearless Girls. Strongly encourage educational institutions to display a portion of their holdings. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, hi. I'm Yates McKee. I'm a historian of modern and contemporary art. I recently published a book about the kind of issues of public art in the aftermath of the Occupy Wall Street and Black Lives Matter movements. I am also a teacher of art history in the CUNY system, and I'm also a parent of 2 kids. And I mention that because what's at stake with how we engage monuments is not just preserving a fixed and frozen past, but inventing a dynamic and living future guided by principles of justice and restoration. I want to ask the panel to be courageous. The solutions about addending and adding and various kinds of compromise formations, I'm not sure if that speaks to the moment that we're in. Grace Lee Boggs used to say, "What time is it on the clock of the world?" Are we at a time on the clock of the world where putting a cue card on a monument or putting a plaque makes sense? Is that what we're talking about? In a moment of Charlottesville and Trump, the way in which dynamics of white supremacy and settler colonialism and patriarchy are more evident than ever. So far from erasing history, so in asking you to be bold, I want to really encourage you on this principle of removal. Far from erasing history, removal is a way of making history. Removal is not merely negative, it is creative. It opens up space physically and symbolically. And speaking as a historian and educator, I can say that the art historical significance of these works that have been recently targeted will be amplified tenfold if they're removed, rather than if they're left to stand there with an anemic plaque or whatever it may be. So I understand that there's already in these commissions been discussions around the Sims and the Columbus Monument. I want to echo Connor's point about, I agree those should be removed, along with the Teddy Roosevelt statue in front of the American Museum of Natural History. For decades, that has been the subject of public grievances by the American Indian movement, by Black Lives Matter, even by an artist like David Hammons, who recreated the work inside MoMA with a police barricade around it in a show called Public Enemy. I want to leave you with this image. When a group called Decolonize This Place did an anti-Columbus Day tour at that museum last month, issuing demands for the replacement of Columbus Day by Indigenous Peoples Day, an overhauling of the museum, and a removal of that monument, the museum was very accommodating to this unofficial tour. The city, however, brought out 100 police officers of all different units, of TARU squads, of surveillance cameras, of everything, guarding that monument. There's also a barricade around the Columbus Monument. A city who has to protect its monuments from its own inhabitants, there's a problem there. If these aren't removed, that is going to haunt the city forever and ever. Those are going to be constant points of antagonism, and who knows what else.
Okay, thank you. Our next 3 is Phil Foglia, Stacy Chubb, and Gabriel Corin. Is Stacy here? Stacy, S-H-U-B, Stacy? If not, we can replace her. Okay, we'll go on. Judy, is it Reichheimer? Yes, okay, you're up. Okay. So take a seat, please, and then we'll start with, I presume you are Phil.
I am.
Okay. We'll
Good morning.
Gabriel, and then Judy, yes.
My name is Phil Foley. I'm counsel for the Italian American Legal Defense and Higher Education Fund. We are part of 50 groups that have demonstrated this past Saturday at the Columbus Circle over the disrespect that has been displayed by people opposing the Columbus Statute and, quite frankly, by the formation of this commission. Italian Americans, and I'm one proud Italian American, have long celebrated Columbus Day, nearly 100 years in peace. And Columbus was chosen as someone who we would march under his rubric because he was an American icon. He was an American icon that is now represented by the fact that there are 54 cities, towns, and counties that are named after him. One of the largest rivers in our nation is named after Columbus, not to mention Columbia University, our space shuttle, and various other aspects of our life. Italian Americans feel very directly disrespected by this. And it's easy to see why. We have a history of anti-Italianism in this country that is as violent as any other community, starting with the largest mass lynching in this country, the Sacco and Vanzetti case, the internment of Italian Americans during World War II, and most recently, discrimination against Italian Americans at the City University of New York, where 42 professors were discriminated against and had to be vindicated by a federal lawsuit. The Italian American response to this discrimination has been one of perseverance and respect for our country. During World War II, while we were being interned, get this number right, 1.2 million Italian Americans served in the military, 18 of whom were awarded the Medal of Honor. Joe DiMaggio's father lost his business and was forced to leave San Francisco. And what was his response? He joined the Army. That's the kind of respect that Italian Americans have for this country, yet we are now being told by people who don't understand New York values that somehow this should be compromised and our holiday and our statute should be disrespected. This is an outrage to our community. We're incredibly upset by it, and it won't be tolerated. For 100 years, we've celebrated peacefully. If you want to see New York values, come to any borough in this city during Columbus Day, and you'll see people peacefully celebrating their culture and heritage with pride. And for anyone to suggest otherwise is disrespectful to us and lacks civility. One of the things I learned growing up is you don't tell other people who they should respect and who they should idolize. This is an American icon, Columbus. He's a worldwide icon. And this is the ultimate disrespect being shown to Italian Americans.
Thank you. Gabriel, Gordon?
Hi, my name is, I am reading. My name is Gabriel Koren. I'm a sculptor. A few years ago, I had the honor to...
You got to speak right into the mic. Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay.
Can we start it over? Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
My name is Gabriel Koren. I'm a sculptor. A few years ago, I had the honor to win 2 public competitions in New York City. This is how I was able to create the life-size bronze sculpture of Malcolm X at the Chabas Center and the 8-foot bronze sculpture of Frederick Douglass on the corner of Central Park. Both cases, my work was part of a collaboration with other artists. I only made the sculpture. Other artists made other artwork in the same location. Yesterday morning, I was at the Brooklyn meeting on public monuments, but unfortunately, I had to leave early. I feel very lucky because I was able to hear a young African-American lady who was asking several times, where are the monuments of the people who were kidnapped from our land? And where are the monuments of African Americans whose sweat, blood, and tears built this country? David Hammonds, one of our great artists who received the Genius Award, had a great artwork at the Whitney Museum several years ago, which I never forget because it expresses what I feel when I see many of the public monuments which are honoring slave owners and mass murderers. In this artwork is in a very big room, which was in the Whitney. There was a huge cube which was covered with 8 feet tall cube, which was covered with photographs of the sculpture which is standing in front of the National Museum of American History. history. Theodore Roosevelt is sitting on a high horse, and both sides there is a happy slave and the happy Native American is standing next to the master. David Hammonds placed packages of dynamites all around the sculpture with all sides. I never forget this work because this work expresses how I feel when I see the slave owner sculptures all over the city and our country. Having said that, I believe that there is not one solution fits all. I have 3 proposals. One is most offensive sculptures, monuments should be removed to a museum with a proper explanation what they did and why they removed from their location. 2, we cannot whitewash history. We cannot whitewash history and remove all the offensive sculptures. This is why I recommend, can I finish recommend?
Yes, if you could wrap it up, thank you.
Yeah. This is why I recommend a very big visible sign near all those sculptures, big bronze signs, so to explain to the public why they are offensive and explaining why they're offensive.
Okay.
And the third one is most important thing, I recommend new public works.
Okay.
Works and which are reflecting African Americans and Native Americans and Puerto Ricans.
Okay, thank you very much.
Those people whose contribution was ignored until today.
Thank you. Yes, next is Judy.
Judy Richheimer, writer and tour guide. Thank you for holding this conversation. We need to look squarely in the eye the history of our nation and of our city, and then represent those histories with honesty and intelligence, at least. And to those requirements, I would add artistry, too. Now, the trick is to keep the conversation going after the work of the commission is done. Several suggestions. Regardless of the compromised reputations of the people being honored, do not tear down their monuments. That removal just ends the conversation in the same way that a secret, out-of-court settlement does little to prevent some future and similar wrongdoing from taking place. Instead, add signage around the monuments, comparable in layout and quality to that erected by the Downtown Alliance and the Bryant Park bid. The text would outline 2 versions of the lives being honored. The one we had thought was canonical, and another provided to us by more recent scholarship and insight into history. 2, with the thought in mind that sometimes the spoken rather than the written word carries more weight, let's give tours, sponsored by the city, perhaps twice a year, that would bring groups, and into perpetuity, that would bring groups free of charge to the monuments honoring controversial people. Taking a more in-depth approach than signage can, the guide would address the history and aesthetics of the monuments themselves and give a broad understanding, the good, the bad, and the ugly, of the figures being honored, which would include a discussion of the societies that shape the lives of the honorees. Of course, employ for those tours only licensed guides, licensed by the City of New York. Finally, as Abigail Adams said, remember the ladies, and, say I, the female hellraisers, too. In Manhattan, we have but 11 public sculptures of women whose names are not civic fame, memory, or the like. And 7 of those sculptures depicting real women are really small. So while it's cheering that full-scale statues of Shirley Chisholm, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Susan B. Anthony are in the works, please someone add to that list Bella Abzug and Frances Kelsey, known for preventing thalidomide from being marketed in the US. Place her across from the New York Academy of Medicine as a kind of rebuke to the problematic Marion Sims, remembering that it is always better to add to history than to erase the parts of it that make us squirm.
Okay, thank you. Our next panel is Diane Frere, Joseph Gagliardo, and Alan Singer. Okay, we'll go in this direction. Diane first.
My name is Diane Frere. I'm a filmmaker and the founder and director of American Indian Artists Incorporated, also known as Amarinda. We're the only organization serving the tribally enrolled Native American arts community in New York City. I'm also from Osage and Cherokee Nation. I grew up on Osage Nation in Oklahoma, but I'm also a New Yorker too. The current movement to emphasize, also too, I'd like to say that I come now to speak on behalf of the board of directors and the organization, and not for all Native people, but for tribally enrolled artists, and also not for other unaffiliated indigenous groups. The current movement to emphasize the destroying or removal of the Columbus statues may be a well-meaning gesture for some, but for some, using the action as an activist political statement is actually only pretext of not offering and offending tribally enrolled Native Americans. It is symbolic and in some ways hollow. Those in the tribally enrolled Native American grassroots community in New York should be honored with equitable treatment by city institutions relative to current political issues involving preserving their present-day legacy and culture in New York City. Pulling down statues in the name of political correctness does not compensate for actual current political mistreatment and discriminatory treatment. In conclusion, Amarinda's position is that it acknowledges the fact that Italian American people have faced discriminatory and exclusionary laws and in fact have been the victims of lynchings and many other attacks. And as such, they have the right to parade and to celebrate their heritage and history in the city with great pride, as any group should have that privilege. It should be mentioned that some scholars have mentioned that Christopher Columbus may not have in fact even been Italian, but possibly Catalonian, in which case the so-called honors have been going to the wrong man for many years. In addition, the mere removal of the statue, as well as the designation of, any kind of plaque or alternative monument merely mentioning the Native American Holocaust in the Western Hemisphere is not sufficient. But these actions should be supported by actual real-life actions that speak to the redressing of real-life current issues and discrimination that is being perpetrated against Native Americans in New York City today. Thank you.
Joseph.
Yes, ready?
Yes.
Good morning. My name is Joseph Guayado. I am the president of the National Council of Columbia Associations of Civil Service. I represent 110,000 Italian Americans in civil service across the United States, but primarily inside of New York City. We protect your streets, we serve our citizens, and we do it with pride. We did not make riches, we're not famous, we're just normal people doing day-to-day work and representing the city of New York in an everyday way. This removal of statues of any sort, to believe that today, now, is the time in history where we're smarter than anybody that has come before us or anybody that will come, is just wrong. It is a great divide, and it's a great divide between cultures and heritages. Italian Americans made Christopher Columbus, because it was accepted by America, part of our family. We weren't taught that he was great, we were taught that he was a voyager. He took the same voyage that Italian Americans needed to take, that Italians needed to take to get away from oppression in a country that was raided, looted, and stolen from, where our goods were taken from us, by every country in Europe, including the Moors. Nobody gave us an apology, nobody gave us restitution, nobody made us a separate country within the country. We were just given a passport and told that we can leave anytime we want. We came to America and we did just that. We're proud of what we did, we're proud of what we're doing. The very important thing that we should be doing as a commission and as a people is coming together, removing this stuff. Literally, it is in stone. Removing this stuff did not do anything but create odds against cultures and heritages. This has got to stop. We need to be able to look at anything that came up in the past and understand why it was put there and why it needs to be removed. It was put there to be able to entice Italian Americans to come here. It gave us greater influence. It gave us greater power as a non-English speaking class to be able to better ourselves, and that's what we did. It was more important to us than the Statue of Liberty. Statue of Liberty that was an influence from another country. And so we should be looking at what it was that caused that monument to be built. We should be looking at why it is that we need to take it down, what it is that this country, that we're afraid of right now, and then we should put up more to be able to educate the future of every single culture, not just the people that believe that this is the time and place that we all are the smartest people that have already walked this earth or that are going to walk this earth. If we move what is literally in stone, then we are making it permanent, and we're saying that we are smarter than everybody else. Thank you.
My name is Alan Singer. I'm a historian at Hofstra University and a lifetime resident of New York City. A scale needs to be developed to decide which monuments should be taken down, and I suggest the following criteria from low to high: complicity, benefited, advocated, and criminal. And there are a number of statues and streets and parks named in New York City after the criminal. If we decide to eliminate everything, we're going to end up eliminating the name of New York City, because the Duke of York headed the Royal African Company, the leading slave traders in the 17th century. These are my recommendations. Anything named after Andrew Jackson, who advocated and committed genocide against Native Americans. The Central Park statue of James Marion Sims. We do not have a statue of Mengele in the city of New York. John Mullaly Park in the Bronx was, Mullaly was indicted for inciting the July 1863 draft riots, which led to the death of over 100 people and the lynching of black men in the city of New York. Central Park statue of Samuel Morse, who during the Civil War advocated for slavery and was an opponent of emancipation. Samuel Cox in Thompson Square Park. Cox argued that the United States were for whites only and was one of the leading opponents of the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution. Sims murdered in the name of science. Mullaly, who was indicted for inciting riots. Their statues have to go. Last, I proposed renaming Metro Tech Commons in Brooklyn. It was the site of the former Bridge Street AME Church. It was where Brooklynites gathered to greet the Emancipation Proclamation. It should be known as Grand Emancipation Plaza. In Brooklyn, I'm known as the rapper Reese's Pieces, so I need to end. Robert E. Lee, his Confederacy, defended slavery in U.S. history. Stonewall Jackson led the attack that drove the Union Army back. Old Hickory slaughtered Cherokee, committed genocide, not a mystery. Doc Marion Sims pursued medical whims, experiments, butchered, enslaved black women. They were villains, not heroes, no place in our town. Time to correct history, tear those statues down. Washington, Columbus, TR2, I'd let them stay, but it's up to you. Thank you very much.
Please, no clapping, sorry. Thank you. Okay, thank you. The next, thank you very much. The next three are Johnny Rivera, William Chivella, and Marina Ortiz. So that's, do we have, and you are Johnny Rivera, William Chivella, I guess it is, and Marina Ortiz. Okay, we have Nadia, do you have more cards? I think we only have two of them. Okay, all right. And so, I'm sorry, you are William and you are Marina? So we're missing Johnny Rivera? Okay. Can I have another card, please? Thank you. Thank you, sir. Matthew Geller. Matthew, if you could join. Okay. Okay, so we'll start with Matthew and go in this direction.
Hello, I'm Matthew
Can you
Geller.
speak right into the mic, yes. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Matthew Geller. I'm an artist. I live in New York City, and I received a Department of Cultural Affairs Percent for Art public art commission 6 years ago for an artwork to be installed in the New Myrtle Avenue pedestrian plaza in Brooklyn. The artwork was installed in the plaza earlier this month. I mention this to say that I'm very familiar with the city's review and approval process for public art, monuments, and public spaces. I've also done public art commissions in other cities, so I have some basis for comparison. Sustaining communities requires places, public spaces, beyond the home, the workplace, and houses of worship, where conversation is the dominant activity, and a wide range of people, including regulars, casual drop-ins, and relative strangers congregate. Public spaces, sometimes named to honor a person, and the usual home for monuments and public art, at once belonged to no one, and as I know you've all heard at these hearings, belong to everyone. Cultural and social relationships created in public spaces help us sustain our sense of community, decency, and our respect for diversity. The effectiveness of these spaces in this regard are influenced by its name, its design, its artwork, its markers, and its monuments. If we are to address the issues that are being highlighted at these hearings, we must reform the review process for markers that commemorate public spaces and public art, as the process is fundamentally flawed. My Myrtle Avenue Public Art Project and the design for the plaza itself, for example, required the approval of a community board, a bid, a half a dozen departments and 2 city agencies, 3 city agency commissioners, and ultimately the Public Design Commission. The review process is onerous, expensive, and at times Kafkaesque. The process doesn't nurture the most innovative, forward-thinking, well-considered decisions. I hope the advisory committee's advice to the mayor includes a recommendation for reforming the structure for reviewing and approving parks, open spaces, streetscapes, art, commemorative, and other historic markers. Because without a new process, it will be extremely difficult to address the complex, nuanced, emotion-laden issues that are the focus of this hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. Marina.
Yes, my name is Marina Ortiz, and I'm here on behalf of East Harlem Preservation. I'm also a member of the Coalition to Remove the J. Marion Sims statue. East Harlem Preservation has been demanding the removal of the J. Marion Sims statue for over 7 years because we believe that a monument honoring a white Southern doctor who experimented on black female slaves without anesthesia or consent does not belong in our community. Our campaign was greatly inspired by earlier efforts by activist Viola Plummer, who began calling attention to Sims' cruel experiments soon after the publication of Harriet Washington's book, Medical Apartheid, in 2006. Since 2010, East Harlem Preservation has sponsored petition drives and public forums. We've also engaged in direct actions with local performance artists, community residents, and members of the New York City chapter of Black Youth Project 100. We maintain that the statue's presence does a huge disservice to our neighborhood's majority Black and Latino residents, groups that have historically been subjected to medical experimentation without permission or regard for their well-being. The debate surrounding the removal of symbols of hate and injustice is certainly not new, although it is certainly broadened to the point where it's no longer a matter of censorship or removing art for content, which was the previous administration's position. We are pleased that Mayor de Blasio has responded to the growing controversy by announcing the formation of this commission. But we've been waiting over 7 years, and we can't be patient any longer. We want the statue removed, and we want it down now. We hope that Mayor de Blasio and members of the commission will join over 20,000 people who have endorsed this campaign. Now more than ever, as the nation undergoes the erosion of our fundamental rights, it is imperative that New York City stand firm in its commitment to honor and defend its residents with this simple gesture. Dr. Sims is not our hero. There are many African American and Puerto Rican women and men who have made great medical inroads benefiting our community. Helen Rodriguez Trias and Rebecca Lee Crumper are just a few examples. These are the sheroes we would prefer that our children learn about as they stroll near Central Park, confident in the understanding that Black lives matter. And since I have a few more seconds, I'm going to take the opportunity to also add my support for the removal of the Columbus statue. While understanding the importance of honoring heritage and history, there are many other Italian Americans that can be honored, and some of them were mentioned: Sacco and Vanzetti, LaGuardia, etc. This nation was founded on the violent displacement of people of color, people who were here and people from Africa. And anyone who was instrumental in that formation of society does not deserve to be honored. Thank you. I also have these for you.
Okay, thank you. You could hand those to, yeah, okay. Thank you. You're up, yes.
Good morning. My name is William Chavella. I'm here today representing the 5,000 members of the Italian American Police Officers Society of New Jersey, as well as being a professor of public administration at the College of St. Elizabeth in New Jersey. I thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk about this very serious issue, but I think it's noteworthy that we sit here on the eve of Thanksgiving, that it shows the value that we have such discussions of things that are of this importance in a peaceful venue. I come here today to talk against the changes or the abolishment of the Columbus statue. As an Italian American, certainly you may ask, why is someone from New Jersey making this trip before the holiday to New York? Many Americans, and certainly many Italian Americans, look upon New York as the unofficial capital of the world. And as a leader of an Italian American organization, we look forward to coming each Columbus Day to celebrate our pride, celebrate our heritage, celebrate our service to the nation at that statue on Sunday morning. And it is very important to us to maintain that statue. Statue represents the values that we have been raised with, the values that we serve with. As my colleague and friend, Mr. Gagliardo, mentioned, Italian Americans make up a very large portion of the civil servants that clean, protect, and construct things in the city of New York throughout the country. So very briefly, I thank you for the opportunity to make these remarks. I hope the Commission will move forward in their due diligence.
Thank you very much. Can I have the... All right. That's it? Okay. And that, okay. So we have two people are co-testifying, Deliane Powerful and Jamila Felix, and then the other is Antonio Serna. If you guys could come up. You get 6 minutes, but it's going to beep after 3.
Okay.
All right?
No problem.
Okay, so we're going to do the 3, and then because there are 2 of you, that's the determination. Go ahead.
Dear committee members, before you stands or sits 2 people who have felt, who have experienced, who have lived, whose mothers have lived, whose mothers' mothers, trans siblings, fathers, communities have lived through and survived everything that has tried to kill us or make us smaller. I, Delaine Powerful, a queer agender femme whose existence and voice has continuously been disvalued.
And I, Jamila Felix, a Black female survivor of multi-generational trauma, are members of the Black Youth Project 100 New York City chapter, and draw upon the strength of our ancestors to stand in front of you here today to confront the history and current day existence of reproductive oppression and demand reproductive justice. We specifically demand justice in regards to the multiple statues in the city of New York that pay tribute or homage to the people who have harmed, experimented on, or owned Black, brown, and or indigenous people. This includes the monument of James Marion Sims that stands at the corner of 5th Avenue and East 103rd Street. Sims is not the father of modern gynecology as his statue claims. Sims was an unextraordinary man, a title he gave himself in his autobiography, who performed excruciatingly painful experiments on black women and femmes in a makeshift hospital in his own backyard. The true mothers of gynecology are Anarcha, Betsy, Lucy, and the 11 other unarmed black women and femmes who were subjected to Sims' torture.
White supremacy has no one form or manifestation. It isn't only Confederate flags and statues. This country's foundation, stolen from indigenous people, tilled and built by black people, use exploitative and violent methods to build a constitution, a democracy that doesn't truly listen to the people most impacted by the harm enacted. Now, when we tell you that we are in pain, when we use these constitutional amendments to exercise our rights to our voice, our body, liberty, and justice, why don't you hear us? Instead, you tell us to pacify our anger, silence our trauma for 90 days. This tells us how much we are not valued, how invisible we are. Sims performed operations without anesthesia only on black people, black women and black people with uteruses, because of the popular notion that black people held a higher tolerance for pain than whites. And yet, here we are, blatantly perpetuating the same erroneous claims that Sims operated under. There are explicit examples in our history that show that this country has never allowed memorializing of any person or thing that has caused harm to white American people. However, it is silently agreed upon that black people can and will live with the pain of existing under the memorialization of their oppressors forever.
How can we condemn overt forms of racism and anti-blackness? How can we sometimes, never, address physical violence against black people but never address or condemn the emotional violence? Never address generational trauma. When research and eco-social framework models have shown us that racism and racial trauma can have a direct impact on racially marginalized people's health. Is there no commitment to health? And if so, whose health do you all prioritize? It's time we look at sexual health advancements. In regards to Sims, his discovery of the treatment of vesico-vaginal fistulas was one of many flukes. As mentioned before, he had set up a makeshift hospital in his backyard and believed that his use of silver sutures during one of his captives, Anarcha's, surgeries was the reason they did not catch an infection afterwards. He then proceeded to use this method during all future surgeries. He asserted that he had made, perhaps, one of the most important discoveries of the age for the relief of suffering humanity. Through this, he claimed to have healed women's fistulas. However, to this day, none of his claims have ever been proven.
In this context, we need to look at Sims' treatment of vesico-vaginal fistulas not only through the lens of the good they may bring some people now, but we must also look at their beginnings as a way to address and heal generational trauma among black people. We ignored the years of medical experimentation on black people. We know the history and the story of Henrietta Lacks, the black woman whose cells were harvested without her knowledge or consent, but how many other stories have been lost, forgotten, and simply ignored?
Taking down memorials, statues, flags is just a step. It isn't the end for this fight for black liberation. But for black people, black women, black people with uteruses, these monuments are constant reminders that we are disposable and insignificant. The existence of statues like Sims are indications of just what and whom the city of New York stands for.
There have been conversations of allowing the statue to remain and instead inserting plaques literally beneath and around the Sims statue of black women and people he experimented on. But this is just another reminder that there is a desperate desire and voyeurism of black pain. This is just another reminder that black people are unworthy of visibility without the presence of a higher, wider, and more oppressive power. The suggestion of placing a plaque literally beneath the statue represents the role black people have been forced to endure. Always being below, always being looked down upon, always less than.
We also seem to forget that the fistulas these black enslaved people had were often results of rape, infections left untreated, poor nutrition, and other consequences of their horrid living conditions. Historians argue that taking down the Sims statue will erase its history, but that history is forever ingrained in our soils, in black bodies. We can never shake it, we can never forget. The removal of these statues is not in an effort to forget, but in an effort to begin to somewhat heal. However, this process cannot begin until our city recognizes the harm it continues to support and perpetuate.
Our city does not hesitate to spend money on memorializing oppressive figures in history, yet we have yet to see any form of reparations to settle up and recognize, one, the black and brown people whose bodies were used for the development of technologies like Puerto Rican people and the pill, and two, the black brilliance by way of doulas and midwives whose very birthing techniques have been medicalized and profited off of while they have received nothing. Everyone in this room is alive due to the explicit, blatant, and intrusive use of black bodies. Everyone in this room owes their life to black women and femmes.
In closing, we demand the statue of Sims in Central Park be removed. We demand that all Confederate and racist statues in the city of New York are removed. We demand that these statues are replaced with monuments of either the victims, their families, or other forms of reparations. We demand the list of symbols of hate be made public and the listed monuments be removed. We demand that no restrictions be placed on the previous demands like 90-day rules and were acted upon immediately. We demand visibility.
Thank you. Antonio Serna.
Hi, my name is Antonio Serna. I'm an artist and cultural worker in New York City. As I listened to the testimonials of the past few days, I noticed that the subject of monuments has stirred up a lot of fear, hate, and misunderstanding. So much so that I feel that from day one, the priority of this commission should have been to educate the people of New York City on the truth about its history, so that it can finally reconcile with its violent past. Without this fundamental work of educating the public, it will come as no surprise that at the end of the day, these monuments to a brutal history remain. In fact, these forces and the specter of dispossession are still with us today, now only justified by the city apparatus of democratically elected and appointed officials privileging for-profit developers over its people. If you look at the population shift on the coastal fronts and the city centers of New York, you will see a mostly white racial majority spreading, and the Black and Latino populations are being pushed further out where city resources are scarce or into homeless shelters. It is no coincidence that New York City's homeless families now number close to 60,000 and are disproportionately Black and Latino. New York City is by far one of the most diverse cities, but also one of the most segregated. In the summer of 2016, New York City had the chance to do what was right and allow African-American artist Aaron Bell to express his feelings related to the lynching by way of his public monument, Stand Tall, Stand Loud, designed for Riverside Park. Instead, the New York City Parks Department forced him to censor his own work and remove the symbolic noose from his sculpture. For this, I am ashamed of being a New Yorker. I am ashamed that to this day, we do not give the space for people of color to express their own history and concerns, and the means to exercise self-determination in designing their neighborhoods and the monuments in this city. But if there's something that has given me hope today, it's what's happening in cities all across the United States. Today, I am proud that for the cities that have renamed colonial holidays to honor Native Americans. Today, I'm proud to hear that the southern town of Charlottesville has removed 60 monuments and secured $4 million in reparations for African American citizens, 250 which were set aside for an African American cultural heritage center. Today, I am proud for the southern state of Mississippi, who, with the work of Equal Justice Initiative, will open the first ever national monument to the victims of lynching in 2018. 4,000 names will be memorialized in this 6-acre monument. After a presentation on art and activism for the students of Pratt University, a student asked me and the panelists, "But don't all lives matter?" I explained to him that one way society shows who matters is by erecting monuments. So I asked him to look around, show me the statues for my people, for the Latinx community, for the African Americans, Asian Americans, for women and indigenous people. Then you tell me, do all lives really matter for New York City?
Thank you. You're saying to do this one next? Okay. So Shulamit Warden, Nicholas Mirzef, and Nancy Hager. Can I simply, hey, are these the cards that I have? Is this the rest of the people who have signed up so far? Or there's more, okay. Okay, and you are, actually, so if you have testimony, I think we're supposed to give it to Nadia, and we'll distribute it to the, yes, okay. Go ahead, and you are?
Hi, my name is Shulamit Warren.
Okay, you're first, okay. And then, Okay, good. Go ahead.
Thank you to co-chairs Darren Walker and Tom Finkelpearl, and to the members of the Mayoral Advisory Commission on City Art, Monuments, and Markers for allowing me the brief opportunity to speak today. My name is Shulamit Warren-Puder, Director of Policy and Special Projects for Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer. Like many cities, states, and countries, New York City is discussing how to address monuments and statues with challenging histories and associations in our midst. This conversation is needed and will ultimately bring a greater understanding to how we highlight the role of monuments in public spaces and how we engage with them. The conversation on the presence and impact of monuments has been ongoing for some time, but we saw a spike in dialogue following the disturbing gathering of white supremacist and Nazi-affiliated organizations opposing the removal of Charlottesville's Robert E. Lee statue. This is not the only statue with such a troubling legacy, and there are few cities that can avoid confronting these issues. Here in New York City and East Harlem, a coalition of community members, my office, and other neighborhood stakeholders have been debating the presence of the Marion J. Sims statue and have participated in community-led meetings advocating its removal. How should New York City approach its own reckoning with history? Perhaps we should begin by examining other countries for models on how to present history. Indian cities have taken different approaches with British Raj period statues. Coronation Park in Delhi, India took all of its colonial statues and put them in one park. The public land where these reminders of a painful past now sit has not erased its imperial origins, but rather it collected painful symbols of it and then allowed their potency to dissolve. I suggest this commission seek out and research examples from other countries and places, as these may broaden our own perspectives on what our choices might be moving forward. Another idea would be for all statues to include a plaque, perhaps with an accompanying app or website maintained with city sponsorship, providing fuller information about the person or persons depicted in them and their historical context, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Our city does need more statues and monuments that celebrate the contributions of its diverse communities. Our heritage as a city built by waves of immigrants, forming a tapestry of vibrant cultures, is one of our greatest strengths. As you may know, Borough President Brewer was deeply involved in working with the Department of Parks and Recreation and other stakeholders to realize the Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony Women's Suffrage Movement Monument. Slated for a 2020 unveiling on the centennial of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, the monument will stand on the Mall in Central Park, and its place on Literary Walk was dedicated in a ceremony earlier this month. The monument will be the first figurative piece depicting real women in Central Park, and will be the park's first commemorative sculpture installation since 1965. Our statues and monuments must include more women and more people of color, and we should look to public-private partnerships to expand statues and monuments beyond our city's parks to include placements in pedestrian plazas and city-regulated, privately owned public spaces, otherwise known as POPs. Thank you.
Thank you. You're next.
Good morning. My name is Nicholas Miazov. I'm a professor at NYU. I teach in media, culture, and communication, and I write about politics and visual media. So this is very much central to my area of concern. And I want to speak to you specifically about the Theodore Roosevelt Monument that's outside the American Museum of Natural History, because I've done research on this. And I want to speak about it very specifically to say to you that this is not simply something that refers to racism, it incarnates racism. It incarnates a theory of racial superiority that is visible and cannot be explained away. Visual media impact us far more quickly than a lengthy text, as you're experiencing this morning, right? The length of time it takes to explain something compared to the visual impact. Roosevelt died in 1919. Immediately, the director of the American Museum of Natural History, Henry Fairfield Osborne, proposed a monument and memorial that was opened in 1936, and the statue was inaugurated in 1939. Osborne was a believer in what he called Nordic supremacy, and this theory also entailed the potential decline of white dominance unless immigration was to be controlled. And these are ideas that have far from departed from our national scene, as we know. The American Museum of Natural History became instrumental to Osborne's policy of eugenics. They hosted the International Congress of Eugenics in 1921. It proposed restrictions on immigration, and in fact opened a whole wing of the museum called the Hall of Public Health, which was designed to promote eugenics and to control immigration. Now, the Equestrian Monument, which is outside to this day, visualizes Osborne's belief in racial supremacy through the now discredited so-called science of craniometry. This is measuring skulls. And the idea here is then that the perfect skull has a vertical forehead, which is extremely hard to find in an actual human being. So what they did was suggest that you would find it in Greek statues. So in the United States, this was a very widely disseminated idea in a book that's called Indigenous Races of the Earth, that claims that there are separate, distinct human races visible in their different skull shapes. So a statue is not a depiction of a racist idea, it is a racist idea. In the Equestrian Monument, Roosevelt's skull is close to vertical, while the African figure has a sloping forehead, and the Indian the most sloped of all. And the very word, the unfortunate racist term slopehead, indicates that this false claim of cranial angle still influences present-day racist caricature, most often applied now, bizarrely, to people of Asian descent. You can see it in the movie Pulp Fiction, amongst other places. So it's not a question that people at that time had bad ideas and that we censure the monument for that, but that it actively visualizes racial stereotypes. Thank you.
Thank you. Nancy.
Hi, my name is Nancy Hager, and I'm a citizen of New York, interested in this topic. Building on, as a PS to the comments of my neighbor here, a week or two ago, there was an interview on the radio with an African-American man who had brought his two sons to the Museum of Natural History. Looking at the statue, one of them said to his father, "How come he gets to ride the horse?" So these statues have meaning, and I think maybe it would be helpful to make some kind of distinction between the function of a public park and a museum. Where do people go in order to be educated? Where do they go in order to enjoy nature, picnics, bird watching, whatever they do, without fear of encountering something that is going to be painful or offensive to them because of their particular heritage? So I guess very simply, I would be in favor of removing all of the statues of the type that were described as the gigantic person that you look up to who's a symbol of power, and replacing them with artworks, with sculpture. I live in the West Village, and in my neighborhood in the Hudson River Park, there's wonderful sculpture, not one offensive figure. And I feel that there are teachable moments from many of the sculptures that have been described here, and I think that there ought to be places where that teaching can happen, but I think there should be places where we can escape from things that are offensive, and especially in such a multi-ethnic city, it's going to be hard to find any figures that are not going to be bothersome to somebody. So I guess that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next panel is Marianne Nicosia, Todd Fine, and Cal Snyder. So we think you're taking a... So we're going to see two more panels. We have quite a few more people. We're going to get to everybody. And we're going to then take a quick 10-minute break right around noon. Okay, Marianne. Yes.
I'm here to say no, you cannot remove the statues of Columbus. You Americans cannot disregard the history my mom learned at school when she was a secondary student at Dominican Republic. My mom would say, you Americans are ignorant about the historical facts about historical Columbus and the voyage of the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. The truth is, you can't compare Columbus to Adolf Hitler, Osama bin Laden, Jack the Ripper, Charles Manson, Ted Bundy, and Nathaniel Gordon, the slave trader. You Americans don't know the history my mom learned at school when she was a secondary student at Dominican Republic. Yesterday, I was at Brooklyn, and yesterday, what I felt was most important to say was, you Americans don't know that my Hispanic mother from Dominican Republic thinks that Christopher Columbus is a hero. But everyone today should know that my mother, Rosa Celeste Valerio Nicosia, thinks that Christopher Columbus is a hero. My mom was born June 8, 1939 at Dominican Republic. My mom got her high school diploma at Dominican Republic. My mom came to the USA back in '72 when she was 32 years old. My mom has been a US citizen since 1988, so no, you can't kick her out of the country if you don't like what I have to say. What I was able to say yesterday at Brooklyn was, the reason why my mom can't testify herself is because she's 78 years old and her health is not the best. What I didn't say yesterday was, I wish my mom was here to testify herself. I feel my mom's testimony, it would be most authentic and heartfelt. My testimony doesn't feel good enough. My mom is no vapid North American Latina like me. My mom is the real thing, born and raised from Dominican Republic. My mom is the most Hispanic. I could say, you know your mama is a Latina when she has read the El Diario newspaper, watches Casa Cerrado, knows who is Julio Iglesias, but loves Mark Anthony. Hey, you know you're a North American Latina like me if you've gone to a Norican party and have danced to merengue music. Maybe I should be a funny girl and say screw Columbus. Mama didn't make me rich and famous like J-Lo, but I am here to say, I love you, Mom. Everyone should know that my mother, Rosa Celeste Valerio Nicosia, thinks that Christopher Columbus is a hero. Peace.
Thank you. Next is Todd. Todd, yes? Todd, yeah, okay.
Yes. Hello. My name is Todd Fine. I'm the president of the Washington Street Historical Society, which is an organization dedicated to the Little Syria neighborhood in Lower Manhattan. I'm also a PhD student in history at the Graduate Center. And some people may know, some people may not know, the city has approved a monument memorial to the writers of Little Syria, which include Khalil Gibran, Amin Rouhani, just a few blocks from here in Lower Manhattan in the financial district. And this is, I think, a great achievement, and I would like personally to thank Tom Finkelpearl, the head of Cultural Affairs, Mitchell Silver, the head of the Parks Department, and our Mayor Bill de Blasio for approving this memorial and monument. I think it's in dialogue with a lot of the issues that have been discussed today about how do we get new monuments in the city. And our organization, myself, we've been in the trenches of this issue for years now, advocating this memorial. And I do think that it's important that this commission think about the process that people are talking about, of how do we make community groups more comfortable in advocating for new monuments and memorials. I don't want to give specific testimony on that, but I think that people involved know that there are issues in making groups feel welcome and ensuring that the memorials they advocate will do justice to the subject. So I think that there should be a positive dimension to this commission as well and how to reform it, but I don't want to give any advice on this. With our memorial, and I am hopeful that something great can be achieved, but we do need your help, all the people here, all the commissioners, to be engaged in what are community groups doing to get new memorials, and how can we ensure that they're done with full justice that's worthy of the subject. You know, the groups need to be empowered. But my testimony is basically about resources for the Parks Department, for Cultural Affairs, to maintain our existing monuments and memorials and to support people to do these things. I think it's very difficult to have a conversation about removing monuments, putting so much focus on all these monuments that we have, where the Parks Department Art Division doesn't have really the resources to maintain its existing monuments. It doesn't have the staff to consider proposals for new monuments. It's kind of, I just feel it's a little absurd in some ways to be focused so much on these old monuments when we're not really supporting the ones we have. And I think the recommendations of this panel are going to be impossible to fulfill without real funding of the Parks Department Art Division and Cultural Affairs. And so I think that the City Council and the Mayor need to, do funding for these agencies if we're going to even have this discussion. And that is part of also our hope with our memorial, that the Parks Department, Cultural Affairs will listen to people like our group, more seriously if they feel that they have the resources to take things on. Right now, I think the default position in many cases is we can't do anything because we don't have the money, and New York should not be like that.
Thank you. Cal Snyder?
Yes, good morning. I want to thank the Commission for the opportunity to testify. My name is Cal Snyder. I'm a historian of New York's cultural and military history, affiliated with the New York Historical Society since 2006, leading walks to many of the city's monuments, and teaching seminars for public school teachers on the use of monuments for instruction in art, in architecture, and history. I authored Out of Fire and Valor, the only comprehensive survey of the city's war memorials from the Revolution to the present. I question one of the basic premises of the Commission. It's that decisions about historical fact and events and objects, the idea that it should be made by a mayor who has preemptively announced that historical traces of our city's life, which he has personally disapproved of, should be removed. And he has a commission to assist him in doing so. I'm going to cite one example to explain why I believe this goes to the heart of all of the discussion that we've had today. There is a pavement insert on Lower Broadway honoring or denoting the parade given to Pétain, the Marshal of France, in the 1930s. The members of the Commission are probably familiar with it. The mayor has already announced that it must be the first to go. Now, this marker does not praise Marshal Pétain. It just, or even denote that he was the hero of Verdun in World War I. It just says that he got a parade on a given date, like most of those insert strips along Broadway. Now, in World War II, Marshal Pétain became the president of Vichy France. This is because it's very difficult for me. And became responsible for allowing the Nazis to deport 50,000 Jewish children from France to the ovens of Auschwitz, a crime for which neither we nor history should ever forgive him. But he got the parade in the 1930s. It's a historical fact. It doesn't honor him. New York did that. It was New York that honored him. We honored him. And that is a historical fact. And this is the problem that needs to be remembered and reflected upon when we think about all of these memorials that have been debated today. I also want to say in closing that the funding of the Arts and Antiquities section of the Parks Department is a high priority. They have over 3,000 monuments to take care of now, and they have only 2 staff.
Okay, thank you. Hey, hold on a second. I'd like to just add them. I'm going to do this one and then this one. I'll add them before lunch. What's it? Okay. Okay, let me then just do this. Okay, I would maybe just depart from the meeting format and say that the mayor did clarify that the marker for Pétain would be one of the first to be reviewed, not the first to be removed. That was clarified later. I just wanted to say that publicly. The next panel is James Kaplan, Glenn Cantave, and Carmine Musumich. Got some advice there. And then we're going to have one more, and then we'll have the lunch break. Or not lunch break, brief break. Oh, thanks. Okay, left to right, we have, I'm sorry, you are James, and then Glenn, and then Carmine, is that right? Is that right? Yeah, okay, so we'll start with James. We'll go in this direction, yes.
My name is James Kaplan. I'm the president of the Lower Manhattan Historical Association, which is a civic organization consisting of individuals and members of various historical groups whose purpose is to promote the very rich history of Lower Manhattan and to educate people about the history of Lower Manhattan and events which they may not be aware. In this connection, we have annually organized a celebration in honor of the American victories at the battles of Saratoga and Yorktown in Trinity Churchyard, the commanding generals of which are buried in Trinity Churchyard, Alexander Hamilton and Horatio Gates. We do July 4th parades for the last 3 years, and on next Friday we'll be organizing an Evacuation Day ceremony and parade starting at Federal Hall and going to the recently renamed Evacuation Day Plaza. For those of you who don't know, Evacuation Day was the day that the American flag was first raised over Lower Manhattan. It was a very important holiday for 120 years. It was forgotten about 100 years ago, but we intend to revive it, and we invite you all to come to our Evacuation Day ceremony on November 24th. In principle, I applaud the creation of the Monuments Committee to the extent that it stimulates and encourages discussion about the city's history and important individuals, which I believe there is, in many ways, cases of woeful lack of understanding. However, I believe the focus, if it is the focus of the Commission on removing monuments, is in many respects misguided. Many, if not most, of the monuments, including those to Christopher Columbus, were erected over 150 years ago because certain were elected in the past 150 years because certain civic groups with the city's approval believed they were of importance, and in many ways they are today. I personally believe the Monuments Committee, however, should focus on individuals and events who are of significant historical importance, who are not well known to New Yorkers, and about whom there should be monuments or markers. For example, the catalyst for our Saratoga-Yorktown celebration was the marking of the grave of General Horatio Gates, who was one of the, second to Washington, probably the most important Revolutionary War general, but was buried in an unmarked grave in Trinity Churchyard until we marked it, until the Daughters of the American Revolution marked it 5 years ago. Evacuation Day is another example. Evacuation Day was a very important holiday, critical, second only to July 4th, but forgotten 100 years ago and hopefully now revived. But I believe there are many other places and events which should be marked and which are not. For example, in Lower Manhattan, 29 South William Street, now the Icon Marking Garage near Millennial High School, is the site of the first synagogue in North America. In 1730, when the Mill Street Synagogue was built, I have four. Can I just get to three others?
Yeah, just if you could just wrap it up.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. 4 other monuments is to Frances Perkins. Frances Perkins was probably the most important woman of the 20th century. But there is no monument to her here in New York City because she was, others are in Harlem. The Marcus Garvey site, where Marcus Garvey's Liberty Hall at 130 West 138th Street, where African independence began. And on 135th Street and 7th Avenue, the $1 Million Houses, that broke the back of the attempt to keep blacks out of Harlem and Philip Payton's Afro-American Realty Company. There's no monument to them. These are the things that you should be focusing on, in our view.
Okay, thank you. And if you can submit your testimony,
Sure.
we can look at
Sure.
those recommendations.
Okay.
Next is
Do I
Glenn.
give it to you, or should I-
Yes. Yeah, no, give it to
Okay.
Nadia or Jeff. And if you could hand the mic over to your to your left. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Glenn Kontav. I'm the founder and CEO of Movers and Shakers, and our goal is to change how the history books are written and the museums and how they address Black and brown history using virtual reality, augmented reality, and the creative arts. What I want to speak about here today is values. I'm extremely confused as far as what exactly New York City does value, and in a broader context, what the United States does value. I'm confused for several reasons, because it doesn't make sense to me that, in terms of the United States, that the only two individuals who are honored with the national holiday are Martin Luther King and Christopher Columbus. One stood for freedom, the other for genocide. I'm also confused by the fact that if you look at the statue of Columbus Circle, and if you go a little bit further down by Central Park South, you have monuments of Jose San Martin and Simón Bolívar, two people who liberated from Spanish imperialism. That makes no sense to me as well. If we look at the case of Germany, it's an objective fact that Adolf Hitler was a terrible human being. If we use the logic that's being applied to this fake Columbus narrative that's going along, you can say, you know, that Germany was economically depressed and Hitler helped it become a superpower. And that, you know, they made a lot of money and they became on the map, but the simple fact is that no one glorifies him because he was objectively a terrible person. And, you know, they maintained a history so that ideally something like this would never happen again. But in the case of Christopher Columbus, you have someone who, after 25 years, decimated 80% of a population. You have someone who wrote in his own diary that 9 and 10-year-old girls were in high demand. So this is, once again, his own words, a primary source. So my question is, does New York City value terrorism? Does New York City value genocide? Does New York City value pedophilia? I'm asking these questions because this is not just an indigenous issue, it's a Black and Latinx issue as well. The majority of the millions of Black and Latinx people are here because of the compounding effects of the actions of Christopher Columbus. So why do we have to pay tax dollars to support monuments and a narrative that directly contributes to our current day subjugation? Furthermore, I just want to mention that Movers and Shakers held a slave auction this past weekend to protest white supremacy and the Columbus statue specifically. If you want to look at more information, you can look at the Huffington Post main website today. We're on the front page. And we're going to continue pushing forward. We're going to be doing a performance art piece on December 3rd. I'd invite you to come to see our augmented reality and virtual reality narrative based on academically justifiable evidence, rather than what a lot of what you're hearing is feeling and tradition versus objective fact. The objective fact is that my people are victims of terrorism, and if New York City is one of the hotbeds of terrorism, why are we promoting that as a value? Thank you.
Thank you. Carmine is next.
Good afternoon. My name is Carmine Musumeci. I am an attorney. I live here in Manhattan, but even more so, I was raised 7 blocks from here in Alfred E. Smith projects. My grandparents immigrated here 110 years ago from Sicily, and they lived on Monroe Street in the what was referred to by Robert Moses as the slums of the Lower East Side. We never regarded it as slums. We regarded it as home. And home was something that got taken away from us during urban renewal. But I digress a little bit. I'm a national director of the Knights of Columbus, an organization which bears the name Columbus. Proudly, 135 years ago, an immigrant priest in New Haven chose the name of Columbus because he served the immigrant community of New Haven, the immigrant community that was beset upon by many people in America by saying, Irish need not apply, Italians need not apply. Yes, that was the America of the 1880s. Only 10 blocks from here is the original Cathedral of St. Patrick's, which the ancient order of Hibernians had to protect from being burnt down by the Know Nothing Party. Yes, that was the 1880s. Fast forward a little bit to the 1920s, when the Ku Klux Klan mounted a national campaign against Columbus, a national campaign to eradicate Columbus, not because Columbus discovered America, but because Columbus was the source of immigration, of freedom for a lot of people in the world to come here, and because he was Catholic. And this eradication of Catholic schools was a primary goal of the Ku Klux Klan. It is ironic that a number of people want to eradicate the Columbus memory now find themselves in the company of the Ku Klux Klan.
Please,
Yes,
please, let's
totally,
not have that.
totally ironic. Welcome to America. Welcome to America, as my grandparents heard. Welcome to America, learn English, and welcome to America. You having a good time?
Please, let's stick
I
to
think
the
I gave you a lot more respect than you're giving me right now.
You said on the same as KK.
Please, come on, let's
Yeah.
have one person speak at a time, if you would
Yeah.
like to continue.
Okay. I think you should be well aware of the fact that eradicating Columbus as a loyal son of Italian descent is an insult, a disrespect to my grandparents, to my parents, and an insult to my children who still live here in Manhattan. Yes, we are now 4 generations here. We chose to live here. We want to live here, but we're afraid to live here now because our American values, our heritage is being attacked. Yes, I think that the days of freedom for us may be questioned by the affront that is now being mounted against Columbus in the name of some sort of nouveau historical bent. It is not something new that Columbus's history has been beset by lies and other slanders. Thank you for your
All right.
time.
Thank you very much. All right, so we're going to just take a quick break to stretch our legs a little bit, if anybody needs to rush off to the restroom. And then we're going to continue again in about 10 minutes, okay? Okay. Do we have any commissioners who are out there somewhere? Thank you very much. So I wanted actually to just start off the second half by reminding people that if you can't stay, there is the opportunity to testify essentially online by going to our online portal. So if you have to run out, that is okay, and that is nyc.gov/monumentscommission. All right, and we'll get started even though, okay. So the next panel, and we're gonna, we have quite a few people more, probably a couple more hours of testimony. We will have to get out of this room at some point, but we have some time right now. So Angelo Vivolo, Vincent Tomeo, and William Donahue are the next 3. Please come up. Okay, are you Vincent?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
And
You
it's
are up.
pronounced
Hold on, let's
Tomeo.
wait 1 second for Mabel to take her seat. Okay, thanks everybody. And Vincent, you are up. Thank you. Go ahead, yes.
I'm first?
Yes, you are.
Thank you. Hello?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm here today as a New Yorker and a proud Italian American. I also stand before you as the 14th president of the Columbus Citizens Foundation, a cultural and philanthropic non-for-profit institution that provides over 700 annual scholarships to students in need and oversees New York City's annual Columbus Day Parade up Fifth Avenue. Most recently and most relevant to these meetings, I have been working with more than 50 leaders in the Italian American community as we stand together as we face down the cultural debate which could label Columbus as nothing more than a historical villain, and the physical defacing of Columbus statues and monuments throughout New York, which, with all due respect to those present today from the Mayor's Commission, are directly linked to the polarizing discussion of statues and monuments, which began in September with a direct critique on Columbus by the Speaker of the City Council. Over the years, Columbus Day and the Columbus Monument have played a vital role in Italian American acceptance and the celebration of Italian culture. The statue of Columbus at Columbus Circle was created by renowned Italian sculptor Gaetano Rosso in 1892 and founded by Italian immigrants to the newspaper sales. In fact, many of the statues on Columbus were financed by Italian Americans. Though it is not often discussed, the Italians who came to New York and other destinations in the 1800s were met with intense discrimination and in many cases extreme violence, and not the least of which was the largest mass lynching in the United States history, which took place on March 14, 1891, with 11 Italians workers acquitted by a jury but lynched by a mob organized by the mayor of New Orleans. It is against this background of discrimination that we as Italian Americans embrace the figure of Columbus, and as a result, these statues often financed by our ancestors. It's an emotional and historical significance to the community that I am so proud to belong to. I am an Italian American, and I am also a New Yorker, and the New Yorker in me celebrates and cherishes the great diversity of the city that we share. I support and applaud the efforts of more recognition for indigenous people of the Americas, and particularly for those tribes in the New York State area. Indigenous culture must and will be celebrated, but as a proud Italian American, I cannot accept that the celebration of indigenous people will require the erasing of Columbus and the history of Columbus in America. No government agency or commission should determine what we as citizens should believe. Every citizen has the right to determine their own beliefs and make their own educated judgment of Columbus. There should be no plaques or kiosks with a revisionist view on the statue. Our rights as American citizens living in a free country must be respected. The statue of Columbus must remain with no alteration or additions. They should be untouched by vandals and allow all of us citizens in a free country to make our own conclusions about the man that they represent. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. And you are next? You are William or Angelo?
No, I'm Vincent Tomio. T-O-M-E-O.
Vincent, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah. Okay. You're Vincent
Tomio.
Yes, Vincent J. Tomio. Sorry.
Hello. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for attending. Now, I don't know if that's politically correct, but excuse me, because I never know what to say anymore, because in using the same word, we do not all have the same meaning. And I hope that that's what this commission is here for, so that we could write history and at the same time include everyone. Well, whose history is it anyway? I was a teacher for 36 years, 32 years in New York Public High School, and 2 years at Yeshiva High School, Queens, and 2 years at the Department of Records. I worked with Ken Burns on the Substitute Relief Committee of the Civil War, and I learned a great deal that I didn't know through primary documents, searching for the truth. I worked with Dr. Leah Hershkowitz from Queens College, who is a New York historian who wrote several books on the contribution and the history of Jews in New York City. Dr. Leah Hershkowitz was instrumental in salvaging documents from archives up in the Bronx, and we had the historical documents collection at Queens College. Well, it is difficult for all of us, because I hope that we're all searching for the truth, and that we speak with our minds and not with our hearts, because sometimes emotion can be sloppy. Ladies and gentlemen, I think this is your job to come up with a definition of what is history. History has been interpreted by many people in many different ways. When I was a teacher, I tried to teach through conflicting interpretations. I could go on. I just want to say, here's a work of art by Degas. It's the ballerina and the dancers. And I admired that work, Impressionist art, and then I found out he contributed to the Confederacy in buying Confederate bonds, and that really startled me. Anyway, sometimes I learn I don't know that much, and I'm learning every day. I'm just going to read this brief essay. Don't erase history, put it in its proper place. Only human beings can set a concept to symbols. If memorials to the Civil War have been reinterpreted to arouse hate, anger, and disunity, then they should be removed to a proper place, a Civil War cemetery or a Civil War museum. We must learn different interpretations of history to discover the truth. Memorials can serve as props to the learning of history. Radicals must not use propaganda, political correctness, or suppress different historical viewpoints. Looking at the past and the present distorts history. History is not always pleasant. History can be a hard pill to swallow. Nevertheless, history is a search for truth. We must learn from our mistakes and try never to repeat them. To tear down historical monuments, burn history books, or allow only one interpretation is not history. It is propaganda, wrong, and plays into the hands of the enemies of truth.
Thank you.
Freedom and the principles of the Republic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, we have to
No, that's okay.
stick to
Sorry.
time. Yes, okay, thank you, sir. William Donahue. Yes.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
My name is Bill Donahue. I'm the president of the Catholic League for Religious and Civil Rights, the nation's largest Catholic civil rights organization. I hold a doctorate in sociology from NYU, author of many books on the ACLU, social issues, and Catholicism. I'm here to talk about an American icon who unfortunately has a dark side to him. I'm talking about Frederick Douglass. His statue is in Central Park. We know him as an ex-slave, as an abolitionist, and I certainly commend him for that and for his work in women's rights. But regrettably, he had an animus against my people, the Irish Catholics. I am an Irish Catholic. I am also a citizen of Ireland, and he hated Catholicism. And this has been whitewashed. It's a cover-up by historians, and it's been going on for a long, long time. He talked about the horrible conditions. He went to Ireland in 1845. He saw what the English did. The English impoverished my people. They stole the potatoes from them during the potato famine. And he looked upon these people. He could not believe the way they were treated. He did say, in fairness to Douglass, that the Irish were the nicest people he'd ever met. He never encountered such lack of prejudice and discrimination as he saw amongst white people in Ireland. But those horrible conditions, he blamed it on the Irish, not on the English. Indeed, it is amazing to read about what he had said about my religion. It's the work of Satan. This is the white Protestant ideas of the 19th century. I know we've made a lot of progress. I'm the first one to admit it. But the residue is there. And he also said that the famine, if you look at Wikipedia, which is not exactly the most stellar example of accuracy, but it's somewhat helpful, they mentioned that he was in Ireland in 1845 during the famine. But they don't mention that he never once condemned the English for what they did. Now, what do I want out of this? I'll tell you one thing. I do not believe in cultural cleansing. I am totally, emphatically opposed to removing any of these statues unless the people in a particular community might have a particular role there. I don't like the idea of government getting involved in this. And I certainly stand with my Italian Catholic friends in saying that the Columbus statues should stay. I don't want Frederick Douglass's statue taken down. He did a lot of good. But there's a dark side to him that has to be recognized, and it never is by historians and by people today. I just want it entered into the record so that students can learn more about it. And as an Irish Catholic, I'm less than enthusiastic about him, but I'm also mature enough to understand that those were the times, and he did a lot of good. And that's my position here. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning, this afternoon.
Yes, okay, thank you. The next panel is Erica Jones, Howard Shiril, and Christopher James. Okay, we'll start with Erica. You could, speak right into the mic. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Erica Jones. I'm a resident of East Harlem, a proud member of Community Board 11 and the Coalition to Remove the J. Marion Sims statue. And I'm here to speak on and demand the immediate removal of the statue of J. Marion Sims, who purchased enslaved black women for the purpose of medical experimentation. Dr. Kimberly Williams Crenshaw, professor of law at UCLA and Columbia, and a black a black feminist legal scholar, says that black women are invisible in plain sight, and that is precisely what this statue represents to me. I chose Harlem. I'm not a lifelong resident of Harlem. I'm actually from Portland, Oregon, which is one of the whitest cities in this country. I was educated at Dartmouth College, where I majored in African American Studies and Political Science. I got my graduate degree in Harlem at Columbia University. I built my career in New York City as an educator of African American history, and I'm currently a dean of students at a private school in New York City. I chose Harlem. I chose Harlem because I wanted to be seen. I chose Harlem because I wanted to be around people that looked like me. I wanted to be a part of the rich cultural legacy and history, and especially black history in Harlem. The legacy of the Harlem Renaissance, of Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, to be around the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, the National Black Theater. There is so much rich history in East Harlem that I wanted to be a part of. So again, I chose Harlem. Harlem is also a community that is fighting, that's fighting for visibility, that's fighting for preservation of our cultural spaces, that's fighting for recognition. So I'm thinking about how much money the city is actually spending on preserving that rich cultural history in Harlem, the history of black people, the history of people of color. We are a community that is fighting rezoning, displacement, homelessness, police brutality, gentrification, unemployment, lack of access to healthcare, education, healthy food. Harlem is absolutely a food desert. Honoring J. Marion Sims and honoring Columbus is honoring violence against black women's bodies, against indigenous people, and is honoring the legacy of white supremacy. To the people out there who are supporting Columbus, who are supporting J. Marion Sims, I would ask you, where would you put a statue of someone who killed and murdered your people? Where would you put a statue of someone who raped your children? What would that plaque look like? Those are the questions that I have for people who continue to say that we are whitewashing history or sanitizing history by taking these statues away. And that's something that I really want you to reflect on and think about. I would also add quickly that Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony vehemently opposed the 15th Amendment, which was a Reconstruction amendment that was passed in 1870 to extend the vote to black men. I would also add that, and just finish the sentence. The 19th Amendment was passed in 1920, and that effectively extended the vote to white women, that black women did not have protections to vote until the 1965 Voting Rights Act. So I would ask, are we also going to be honoring Anna Julia Cooper, who was a black suffragist that was often disenfranchised from white suffrage groups? Fannie Lou Hamer, Sojourner Truth, who in 1851 said, "Ain't I a woman?" as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, please, no clapping. This is the preferred mode. Thank you very much. Howard?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, my name is Howard Skrill, and I'm an artist and an educator, and I have created an art project called the Anna Pierpont series, where I draw public statues, mostly outdoors, throughout the city. These images I combine with words into pictorial essays that explore the erasure of public and private memory, including historical and contemporary iconoclasm, as well as and as with, just in August, the removal of a bronze portrait bust of Robert E. Lee that was created by George Brewster, and Thomas Stonewall Jackson, created by Brian Baker, overnight from the Hall of Fame for Great Americans on the campus of Bronx Community College, where I taught for a long time, in response to the murderous violence in Charlottesville and the equivocations of politicians on the federal level. I really would like to transport you back, though, to March 7th, 1985, literally across the street from this place, where in an ornate hearing room, I can remember myself as an undergraduate student leaning over a banister and observing over 120 people testifying in support of the artist Richard Serra and his massive corn and steel sculpture Tilted Arc that was targeted for removal from a public plaza. Again, literally around the corner. I and my fellow students were transported by our faculty in order to show support for Serra, who many in our community believed was being persecuted by the federal government that insisted ultimately successfully for the work's relocation, which turned out to be its destruction. Many rushed to the barricades in Serra's defense on that day. Over 100 people representing the elite of the New York art world spoke against the removal, with some arguing that artists and artworks need protection against political forces from the other side of the barricade that would target artists to achieve political aims. It is fair to ask if this committee, whether Tilted Arc's defenders are fulfilling perhaps the dangerous precedent established in the Tilted Arc trial by manning the opposite side of the barricade that its detractors once occupied. I ask this only to illuminate that the battles over public monuments coincide with the rise and fall of political factions. Many of us believe that the treatment of Serra violated his rights as an artist. It is fair, therefore, to ask if the very act of monument removal impinges the very rights we champion for Serra. If we set aside the principles we fought so strenuously for to preserve when we were in the opposition, we may wish, as the political winds shift again, that we held more tightly to them now that we are the arbiters of the fate of these monuments, instead of sacrificing them to political expediency. Thank you.
Thank you. Christopher James, please.
Hello. First of all, I think it's very important that this committee exists. As important as a committee for the fixing the trains or for education, it's just as important in terms of quality of life in New York City. Many people are upset that, Bill O'Reilly and Charlie Rose, exposed as sexual predators, are not who they thought they were. They're now fired, so we won't see much of their faces anymore. Many Italians, fortunately, have helped expose the bad truth about Columbus. And while they are sad, they don't want to see his face anymore as well. For centuries, Columbus was just a small, bad moment in history until a writer, Washington Irving, wrote Sleepy Hollow, started to write an English biography of Columbus. He started out writing that Columbus was a murderous failure, but then he stopped and realized, this hard stuff won't sell copies. Let me instead create a hero and say he proved the earth was round and discovered America. Even though during Columbus's time he never set foot in America, and it was already common knowledge that the earth was round. Irving's story wasn't known until the 19th century when Italians immigrated to America. At first they were persecuted, and treated poorly, until some Italians cleverly started showing the Irving story to any American that would listen, to show they had a connection to America, and then they were finally accepted. So since they didn't bring the European version of Columbus to tell, it's important to know that the Italian and Spanish version was compiled from two key sources: Columbus's own diary and letters, of which none, by the way, were written in Italian because he only spoke and wrote Catalan, and from the letters that his crew wrote and sent back to Spain. The crew wrote and complained that Columbus was having them commit heinous crimes against the people who they met. Columbus's own writing confirmed much of this. In a letter to one of his Spanish patrons about the people he met, Columbus said, "They are very decent and generous people, but then he interrupted in the midst of all that good writing, they would make fine servants. We can make them do whatever we want." He packed hundreds of them onto ships and sold them as slaves. Many died during the trip. Those that remained were forced to search for gold. There wasn't much. He disfigured them if they were unsuccessful. He made everyone convert to Christianity. He began the depopulation of Hispaniola in 1492. 1/3 were killed off in 4 years, and then over time, several 100,000 more were killed until only a few hundred remained. It's not about removing history. It's about removing a mistake. That's it, in a nutshell.
Thank you. The next panel is Maureen Silverman, Robert Borio, and Lynn Roberts. Actually, to keep things going more quickly, let me just tell you who the next three will be, and then you guys can be ready to come up. It's David Eisenbach, Travis Bali, and Arthur Piccolo. So if you guys be ready to come up right after this. So we have, is this Maureen? Maureen, Robert, and Lynn. Go ahead, you're up.
Oh, okay. Yeah. As a native New Yorker who has lived in Manhattan for over 25 years and an activist, I urge the city of New York to remove the violent white supremacist statues of Christopher Columbus, J. Marion Sims, and Theodore Roosevelt once and for all. Given that this country and city are built on white supremacy, including slavery of African Americans and genocide of indigenous people, it is imperative to dismantle statues of people such as J. Marion Sims, Columbus, and Theodore Roosevelt, which upheld this legacy. The current political climate of rising white nationalism and white supremacy is an opportune time to evaluate, face, and advocate to overturn the destructive, oppressive systems and symbols in this country and city. Accordingly, statues are meant to honor people who have made our society better, not people such as J. Marion Sims, Columbus, and Theodore Roosevelt. While they may have made some contributions to humanity, they also committed tremendous atrocities which do not deserve honoring with statues of any kind. By allowing these statues to remain, our society has admitted that they are not committed to ending white supremacy. Now is the time to remove these statues and embark in a new discourse based on honesty and justice. Accordingly, I oppose recommendations to maintain these statues with the addition of plaques containing historical information and explanations related to the racism of these people. I stand in solidarity with the recommendations of people I have partnered with, such as Black Youth Project 100, and the recommendations of the American Indian Community Center. It would be great if some of these, if there are statues, there are more statues of freedom fighters who fought against the racism, exploitation, and state violence that J. Marion Sims, Columbus, and Theodore Roosevelt perpetuated. I just want to say that white people have a special responsibility to speak out against these forms of racism because of our privilege. Ask for, considering the beginning of this panel, there was talk of issues of exclusivity and imbalances of power. When my voice is valid, I ask to prioritize the voices of those who've been excluded and disempowered, people of color, and indigenous recommendations should be prioritized, while I stand in solidarity with all of them.
Thank you. Robert Ferrero.
I just wanted to introduce myself in my own indigenous language. Da iri mukaro agwebana boriken taino daka. My indigenous language comes from my Taino heritage. The Taino people were the very first people in this whole hemisphere to be called Indians. And that was a misnomer that was placed upon them by the Admiral of the Ocean Seas, Christopher Columbus. Or when I grew up, learning about him, also called him Cristobal Colon. which name that translates to the Christ-bearing colonizer. Look it up. I'm here representing the International Indian Treaty Council, which is an indigenous rights organization over 40 years old. We were the very first indigenous organization accredited at the United Nations as non-governmental organizations. We were founded in Standing Rock. I'm also here representing the United Confederation of Taino People, which represents indigenous peoples of the Caribbean. And we're here to align ourselves with the calls for the removal of the Columbus statue in Columbus Circle and all around the city. These calls were made by organizations such as the American Indian Community House, the American Indian Law Alliance, etc. So we want to associate our call and demand for the removal of this statue, as well as associate ourselves for the removal of the Sims statue and also the Teddy Roosevelt statue. I myself worked at the Museum of Natural History for over 10 years in the education department, called that statue into question a number of times, and we see it's still there, no explanations. It still goes on. It's still concern for a lot of people. As a Taino person, listening to some of the commentary about Columbus, and just listening to the passionate pleas on both sides, I'm just wondering, how is it that these ideas of, okay, one community here in New York, I'm a New Yorker, is because there's a lot of them, their voice is somehow much more important than those who don't have much of a voice, than a minority community. One way to look at this is this is not only a national issue, the Columbus discussion, it's a New York issue. There's more American Indians here in New York than any other state in the country. That's a fact verifiable by the census. But still, when you look at the overall population, we are a minority. So what I would like to ask and add here is that why is it that the pride for one community can supersede the tragedy experienced by another? Why is our story less than the pride of another community? I have not heard one person say attacking Italian Americans or attacking a symbol of genocide, which is Columbus. This is a fact. He initiated the transatlantic slave trade. This is not debatable. But yet we still seem to be seen as those who are wanting to take away this imaginary narrative of the U.S. I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you. Lynn Roberts.
Thank you. I'm a scholar activist and professor in the City University of New York's Graduate School of Public Health and Health Policy located in Harlem. I'm also an emeritus board member of the Sister Song Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective. I would like to begin by explaining what reproductive justice is. From its inception, the reproductive justice framework has utilized an intersectional analysis based on internationally accepted human rights doctrine and the practice of self-help and community care to heal from the multiple traumas of sexual and reproductive oppression, which can be defined as the control and exploitation of cis and trans women and girls and other marginalized individuals through our bodies, our sexuality, labor, and reproduction. There are several examples of sexual and reproductive oppression visited upon indigenous and people of color throughout our shared history in the United States and up until the present. In addition to the exploitation of their labor, enslaved women of African descent were forced to breed only to have their children sold as chattel during slavery. And as has been very well documented by Harriet Washington, there are few more egregious examples than the fact that between 1845 and 1849, the purported founder of modern gynecology, Dr. J. Marion Sims, experimented on enslaved African women and their infants without anesthesia to perfect surgical procedures for white women and children. It was this dehumanization of black bodies that has contributed to an enduring legacy of sexual and reproductive oppression. Reproductive justice is the unequivocal, mobilized resistance to sexual and reproductive oppression. As first introduced by Sister Song and since expounded upon by others, reproductive justice is the human right to decide if and when you will have a child and the conditions under which you will give birth or create a family, to decide if you will not have a child and your options for preventing or ending a pregnancy, and to parent the child or children you want or already have with the necessary social supports in safe environments and healthy communities and without threat of harm from individuals, organizations, or institutions of the state. And fourth, bodily autonomy from any form of sexual or reproductive oppression. In August 2014, I chose to be photographed in front of the statue of Dr. J. Marion Sims located on the perimeter of Central Park. I wanted to honor the victims of his cruel and unusual medical experimentation on enslaved African-descendant women and infants by connecting their sacrifice to the long line of black, cis, and trans women and girls whose bodies have been brutalized by reproductive and state violence and oppression. I'm going to skip ahead to say that at a time in New York City when black women are 12 times more likely than white women to die as a result of complications during pregnancy and birth, we cannot tolerate this symbolic reminder of the disregard for the human rights and dignity of African-descendant women and their children. I'm a member of the recently formed coalition to remove the Dr. Sims statue, reclaiming reproductive rights of women of color.
Thank you very much. The next panel is David Eisenbach, Travis Bali, and Arthur Piccolo. So after that, if you want to get ready, we'd like John Derek Norvell, Maureen Silverman, and Joseph Schelsa to be ready to go next. Okay, we have David, Travis, and Arthur are up next.
Hi, my name is Dr. David Eisenbach. I teach history at Columbia, and I ran in the Democratic primary for public advocate this year. During the campaign, I offered up a proposal for a new Columbus Circle. It got reported in the New York Times, the LA Times, the New York Post, and I have an op-ed piece in the Daily News that came out last month giving you some more details than what I'll be able to cover today, and I'd like to offer this up to the commission members as perhaps a compromise between both sides who have very good arguments, and they have the facts on their side. The fact is, Columbus was a monster. He was a slave trader. He did sell girls the ages of 10 and 12 and bragged about how much money he could make off them. But at the same time, those who want to defend the statue are also right. The people, the Italian-American immigrants who collected their nickels and dimes to build this statue, were not celebrating that monster. They were celebrating a myth, as somebody pointed out earlier, made up by Washington Irving. He was a hero. He was an Italian hero. And it was a way for them to combat prejudice by the majority of Americans at the time who saw Columbus as a hero and thought, well, wait a second, he's Italian, maybe we can accept these Italian Americans. And so to take down that statue would be a disrespect, as somebody said, to the Italian-American community. So what can we do? Well, we can keep it and use it as an opportunity to teach some history. It's an ugly history, it's a dark history, but it also has some good points, just like America itself. And so instead of just walking past the statue on the way to Central Park, which is what people do today, we will actually take a history journey in which we will see the good, the bad, and the ugly. Three aspects of Columbus and his legacy: the conquest, the brutal conquest, the enslavement of the Taino people as well as Africans, but also a celebration of the Italian-American experience and of the immigration experience in general. And what better thing to have than a celebration of immigrants right in the shadow of Trump International Hotel? And so we have the opportunity here to really do something special, to make Columbus Circle more than just a pretty park, to use the footprint that is in 3 pieces to tell the full story. It's a story of America. It's got some ugly parts for sure, but it also has some good parts. There's parts that we do have to honor, and that's more important now than ever. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Travis is next.
Thank you to members of the Commission for allowing me to testify here today. My name is Travis Bali. I am the Associate Field Director for NARAL Pro-Choice America. The 1.2 million member activists of NARAL fight for reproductive freedom for every person in every state. And each day we organize and mobilize to protect that freedom by fighting for access to abortion care, birth control, paid parental leave, and protections from pregnancy discrimination. Since 1969, our member-driven campaigns have propelled political and cultural change at every level, from the State House to the White House. Today, I'm here on behalf of our over 50,000 members here in New York City to say that NARAL is proud to stand in support of the leaders of the coalition to remove the Dr. Sims statue, especially the Black Youth Project 100. We are together with our allies in declaring that a man like J. Marion Sims deserves no monuments or accolades. No one deserves a monument who experimented on enslaved black women without their consent, without anesthesia, and often at the cost of their fertility. At this very moment, our nation is in a state of radical change. The voices of survivors of non-consensual acts are rising, echoing in almost every major power center of our society. Subsequently, we have seen a growing awareness in the national consciousness of voices long ignored. While in a different context, the discussion around the J. Marion Sims statue is a complementary discussion. At what point will we confront the gross misdeeds of those we as a culture honor and hold up? How many black or brown bodies does someone have to step on while achieving their professional accolades for us to say enough? The story of J. Marion Sims and his medically unethical experiments should always be studied and remembered, if only to ensure that we understand the institutional barriers that held black and brown women back, and how that history still lives among us today in one manifestation in the form of existing racialized medical disparities, such as with the maternal mortality rates. We do not need a monument to Dr. Sims in order to remember and learn from his dark legacy. A monument connotates governmental and societal recognition and approval of the figure and their accomplishments. The ugly juxtaposition of honoring such a man as Dr. Sims through a public monument, especially in a neighborhood that is majority people of color, is glaring. I thank the Commission for your time today and urge the swift removal of the J. Marion Sims statue.
Thank you. Next is Arthur Piccolo.
I had intended to read my statement questioning the very legitimacy of this committee as a form of an inquisition, but I think what we're hearing today, more than anything else, proves that what goes on at an inquisition. The kind of nonsense you're hearing said about Christopher Columbus is a total outrage. This gentleman calls him a monster. This other gentleman says that he initiated the African-American slave trade. Other recent speakers said that he raped young black girls. I'm very familiar with the history of Columbus. I don't believe he ever met an African-American during his entire life. The reality of what happened, Columbus's 4 journeys were incredibly important to American history. His first experience of violence in the Americas was on his second journey. During his first journey, one of his ships was destroyed, and he was forced to leave 36 of his men here. When he returned from Spain to come and retrieve them, all 36 had been slaughtered by the islanders on the island where he had left them, Haiti. The fact is that during his journeys, he was often asked by the native islanders to give them protection from other islanders who were their enemies. Most of all, and the largest group, were the Caribs, who actually were cannibals, all right? There was tremendous fear without the Americas. The point about the Americas, it was as complex a society as the American society in its own way. There were peaceful groups, there were warrior groups, there were many that hated each other, others didn't. It was a complex society. Columbus is not the one who initiated all that followed. The Regimento of 1513 was a Spanish document that was written 6 years after Columbus's death, where in fact it said enslaving the Americas was in effect worth doing, it was legitimate to do, and it was the work of God. The most important historical book about the journeys is a book called The Columbian Connection, all right? In it, this important historian argues that the most important event in human history was the first journey of Columbus. 2 societies that were so far different from each other, that had no contact for thousands of years, the Americas and Europe, Asia, came together at that time, and it was the most monumental event in human history. Another interesting point that no one makes, there were no horses in the Americas. Columbus introduced, as one example of many, horses. Horses transformed native society, particularly North American. Indian tribes, which had been confined to foot traffic, became to roam the Americas, and for hundreds of years after that, before they were decimated by people like Andrew Jackson, the horse was the most important thing that ever came to the Americas. So what you're hearing about Columbus just lacks any credibility. We should have an Indigenous People Day, but it should be a day. Let's pick another day, and the reason we don't have an Indigenous People Day is because they want to replace another holiday with it. So, you know, we're hearing an inquisition type of a presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Please, we ask you. Okay. John Derek Norvell, Maureen Silverman, and Joseph Shelsa. And then after that, just so you're ready, Diana Leo, William Russo, and Joseph Shora. Okay, do we have Maureen? You already spoke. Okay, we're going to jump ahead then. How about Diana Leo? Could you join this panel? Okay, thank you, Diana. Okay, and you are?
Yes, I'm Dr. John Derek Novell, and I am head of an organization known as the African American Pinkster Committee of New York. This is one of our flyers here. Pinkster is the oldest African American holiday of New York and of the 13 colonies. It was brought over by 11 Congolese and Angolans in 1626. It was outlawed in 1811 because it was used for the abolition of slavery. Each year there was an African king of the community who protected that community even during slavery. And he, we know his name was Charles. He was from Angola. He was a master drummer, but he also stood in courts, in Dutch courts, to fight for the rights of those who were enslaved, even though he was enslaved. But the African king grew to too much power for New York, and so they outlawed the holiday in Albany in 1811 and tried to outlaw it further in New York. We brought the holiday back under Governor Patterson after about a 200-year hiatus. We've been celebrating for, this was the 7th year in the African Burial Ground, right around here. And so we are historical activists. We are about bringing back a lot of the history of omission as well as commission. Now, I live on Fifth Avenue, and I don't live that far from the evil statue of Sims. That statue must be removed. And it gets me because you have Sims' statue, they're always polishing it. You know, I saw them polishing it in August. But what about the statue, or any statue, to Henry McCune Smith? He was the first and only licensed doctor in New York of African-American descent, throughout the whole period of the antebellum years leading up to the Civil War. He was given an endowment by the Marquis de Lafayette for his studies and to be a doctor, because no university in America or New York would allow a black to go to college, whether they were free or enslaved. And he was so angry by that, the Marquis, that he said, I will get you to the best university in the world. And so he went to the University of Glasgow, Scotland, and came back the only licensed doctor in New York. And he was a Martin Luther King and a Malik Shabazz and a Dr. Sparkle rolled in one. But there's nothing to him. There's a school on 142nd Street with the letters falling down of his name. Where is his memorial? Where is the memorial to something we're fighting for, we want your help for James Reese Europe, the father of jazz? In fact, he was the one who was the band leader for the 369th. He went over to World War I. He was the leader of that band, but he also brought music, jazz music, to the Europeans, even to the Germans he was fighting against. The French composer Darius Milhaud said, when he heard this music, Je vois le futur, c'est le jazz. But there's nothing to him up there on 142nd Street in the Armory. Nothing, not even his name there on the little triangle that goes into the Harlem, Harlem River Drive that was known, now called Harlem Hellfighters. What about James Reese? You know, there's monuments that we need and other monuments that need to be done away with. Now, people talked about Columbus. We know for a fact that Columbus' son brought in the slave trade to Hispaniola 1502. Why don't you have monuments to Father de las Casas or to Jan Rodriguez, who was before Peter Menuet, who was an African from the island of Hispaniola? Finally, I'd like to say that what is also needed, folks, We need a change in the curriculum in the schools. We need a people's history of New York, just like Howard Zinn had a people's history of the United States. We need a people of color history of New York. We have nothing, for instance, about the Chinese history community. There were Chinese soldiers in the Union during the Civil War. Nobody talks about that. Or the killing of blacks and Chinese during the most egregious violent actions in New York, which was the 1863 draft riot. That was an insurrection against the Union.
Okay, thank
so
you.
let's
Thank you very much.
have these changes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, try to keep the time, but thank you very much. Diana Leo.
Hi, my name is Diana Scopoletti-Leo, and I'm a member of an organization called Showing Up for Racial Justice. I am a third-generation Italian-American. Like many Italian-American New Yorkers, my great-grandparents came here to New York from Calabria and Sicily in the early 20th century in search of a better life. A Manhattan resident for 17 years, I am a product of the Italian-American dream. My grandparents grew up on the Lower East Side. My parents grew up in Brooklyn and Queens. I grew up on Long Island. Now I'm back here, first member of my family to go to college. I am the culmination of 4 generations of hardworking people who love this country, played by the rules, and sacrificed for their children. I'm here to tell you that Christopher Columbus does not represent me or the Italian Americans who came before me. First, Christopher Columbus wasn't truly Italian. Italy did not exist until over 350 years after he died. Columbus was from Genoa in the north of Italy. To Southern Italians like my ancestors, Genoa is like a foreign country to this day. Furthermore, Columbus's supposed accomplishments were not done on behalf of Genoa or any other region of what we now call Italy. He was an agent of Spain. His ships, crews, and financing for all of his voyages to the Western Hemisphere were Spanish. Second, Christopher Columbus did not discover America. Indeed, he never set foot on this continent. Christopher Columbus did not even discover the New World. He accidentally encountered certain Caribbean islands while trying to find Asia, and incorrectly believed these islands were part of Asia until his dying day. In fact, Amerigo Vespucci was the first European to realize there was a New World, not Columbus. Christopher Columbus was not even the first European to travel to the Americas. Vikings did that 500 years before him. The true discoverers of the Americas were Asian. 20,000 years ago, they migrated across a land bridge from Siberia to Alaska. Their descendants were the tens of millions of people that populated the Americas when Columbus arrived in the Bahamas in 1492. If Christopher Columbus wasn't truly Italian and he didn't discover America, what did he do? As you've heard, a tool of Spanish colonialism, Columbus kidnapped, enslaved, and committed atrocities against peoples of the Caribbean. He was a brutal governor of the Spanish colony of Hispaniola, terrorizing the native Tainos and Spanish colonists alike. He also claimed Cuba, Puerto Rico, Jamaica, and other islands in the West Indies for Spain. As you've heard, the peoples of the Caribbean were decimated. It's 2017. The time has come to remove all monuments to white supremacy in New York, including those that have been erroneously associated with Italian-American heritage. Please remove all statues of Christopher Columbus from our city.
Thank you. Joseph, you're next.
Well, first I want to thank the Commission for this opportunity to speak before you. Let me tell you a little bit about my background. My name is Joseph Shelser. I'm the founder and president of the Italian American Museum in New York City. It's Little Italy on the corner of Grand and Mulberry Street, just a few blocks away from here. The Italian American Museum was officially founded on June 12, 2001, when it was chartered under the aegis of the University of the State of New York State Education Department. The Italian American Museum is more than an immigrant museum. Its purposes are to document the myriad of contributions made by people of Italy and the descendants to the very fabric of American society, from its earliest origins, its philosophical underpinnings, through philosophers, explorers, adventurers, industrialists, scientists, educators, politicians, and everyday people telling the whole story, which continues to flourish and evolve in America today. Prior to becoming executive director of the Italian American Institute, I was a vice president at Queens College. I was also the first dean of the John D. Calandra Italian American Institute of the City University of New York. During my tenure at the university, I was appointed vice chair of the Multicultural Advisory Board for the New York City Board of Education and the co-chair of the Intergroup Relations Council for the New York City Board of Education. In 1992, I sued the City University of New York for discrimination against Italian Americans with 42 other Italian American professors. And we won. We were granted an injunction by Constance Baker Motley, a federal court judge, for discrimination, barring the university from discriminating against Italian Americans. It stands on the books today. I hold a doctorate in sociology and education from Columbia University. That name has come up a few times today. The subject of my dissertation was constructive pluralism, however, is a concept by which each group respects the rights of others to celebrate and practice their culture in their own way, and to share those practices and beliefs with other groups in a civil society. Thus, in my mind, maintaining the monuments in New York City is in particular Christopher Columbus, are strongly supported by the concept of the constructive pluralism, a concept endorsed by the United Nations in promoting peace and harmony in a pluralistic world. The removal in any way of city monuments does not. That would be destructive pluralism, the very opposite of what is intended. What is necessary is a dialogue between people with the goal of obtaining a mutual respect and understanding of each other. No one group, large or small, is superior to the other. In closing, and I know I just have a few seconds, I'd just like to set the record straight on a few things. Washington Irving did not, though he glorified Columbus, it was really the founders of the United States who named the District of Columbia. It really started long before that. And Booker T. Washington, in 1900, traveled in Sicily and said the conditions of the Italian Americans and the Italians in Sicily was worse than the enslaved Africans in America. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the next three is William Russo, Joseph Sciorra, and Nancy Sherman. Okay, I have been informed that William Russo has departed, so I'm going to add Terry Goldman to this panel. If Terry Goldman is here. Yes, please come up. So, Joseph, you're up.
My name is Joseph Sciorra. I'm the Director of Academic and Cultural Programs at the John D. Calandra Italian American Institute, a research institute at Queens College concerned with Italian diaspora and Italian Americans in particular. For the past 35 years, I've worked as a folklorist in New York City, documenting, researching, and writing about the ways in which everyday New Yorkers create artistry and in their local communities, and from everything from Puerto Rican casitas to spray can memorials, and to the Brooklyn Williamsburg Giglio Feast and the Our Lady of Mount Carmel Shrine in Staten Island. My interest is in material culture and vernacular architecture, and with that, I wrote an article recently with Laura Roberto. I've submitted it to the committee, and I'd like to read just an excerpt of it regarding Columbus statues, monuments, not only in New York City, but elsewhere. Columbus, as a symbol of American manifest destiny, emerged as an American cult hero way before most Italian Americans arrived. In the late 19th and early 20th century, Italian immigrants saw the American idolization of Columbus as a way to deflect the onslaught of xenophobic and racial prejudice and violence they encountered, and for which they were relatively unprepared as new arrivals in the United States. They bought into and contributed to a specific Italian reading of Columbus in relationship to their brutal experiences of bigotry. Italian Americans built their emerging identity as provisional whites out of this hagiography. The dynamics of symbol building around Columbus for a once marginalized and attacked immigrant community, whose descendants are now firmly planted in corporate boardrooms, the highest echelons of political power, and white suburbia, necessitate a nuanced discussion about class and race in the United States, which I'm not going to go into here today. Many Columbus statues around the country were commissioned, paid for, and built by Italian immigrants. The statues were not created, as in the case of Confederate statues, to impose political dominance over others. On the contrary, the monuments were a means to gain working-class Italian to gain entrance into a racist society under the cover of whiteness. I'm going to skip ahead. All symbolic works, especially those that bear the weight of group identities, are open to reinterpretation by members of a pluralistic society. Representatives of local and national Italian-American voluntary associations have come out vigorously in opposition to the removal of Columbus statues in the name of Italian-American victimization, while re-articulating their support for Columbus Day. These self-appointed ethnic leaders claim to speak not just for their membership, but also on behalf of a larger, unspecific Italian-American community. Yet numerous Italian-American artists, activists, and scholars have long spoken out against Columbus and his legacy. Understanding the historical context in which the commemorative objects are erected reminds us of the dangers of investing too much symbolic power in any one individual. Thank you.
Thank you. Nancy Sherman.
Hello, I'm here today. My name is Nancy Sharon, and I'm here as a member of the public. I've lived in New York City for over 50 years, now retired. I did get a BA in art history at Hunter College. Public sculptures and monuments are erected at specific times and places, and interpretations of history, values, and tastes will change over time. We are currently in a very polarized time, and we should be aware that our judgment is going to be colored by this polarization. Some people are important to our present day understanding of our history, even though they are flawed or their accomplishments had negative side effects. We should strive to protect a balanced view of a historical person's accomplishment. Public sculptures may also have artistic value apart from their value as a commemorative work. I propose certain guidelines as follows. You should look at the merit of the historical figure or incident, and it's going to be in today's terms. The artistic merit of the work. Does it glorify historical figures or events more than we would do in our present times? Is there an unbalanced presentation of monuments glorifying one group of people and events to the exclusion of others? A sense of proportion and diversity should be maintained. I feel that remediation could be done at several levels. It doesn't have to be the removal of the monument or plaque. Maybe there could be additional interpretive materials to explain the negative side of the person as well as their accomplishments. And also the addition of additional monuments that represent other groups. As far as Columbus is concerned, most of us in this room wouldn't be here if it weren't for Columbus, so we should definitely take that into consideration. Perhaps we need to also show, not perhaps, but we should also show the tragic side effects of what happened after Columbus came to this continent. There were some terrible things that happened to native populations and their way of life. And one other point, if you are planning to replace and add new monuments, please consider using New York artists. There are so many talented artists in this city, and I feel that they understand the complexity of our neighborhoods.
Thank you. Terry Goldman.
Beautiful words from beautiful people. We're one city. We're one people under God, and that's the one thing that's missing from this discussion. Without a sense of the common good, we are lost. I have a stone in my heart, and I feel as though a lot of us in this room are carrying stones in our hearts. How are we going to be teachers? How are we going to create art if we don't start feeling not only passion, but compassion? Please, let's take the emotion that we all are born at, and use it for the good. The Jews, when they lose their parents, say, God bless my teacher. Women, black women, you are the teachers of your children. Don't put stones in their heart. Free them. I've lived with a black man for 42 years. I know what it means to be upset as a black person. I'm a Jewess whose father was irradiated in the Navy during World War II and lived for 35 years with a cancer that embellished his entire head with sores. And yet I'm not bitter. To be bitter loses the joy of life. And art, I'm an art historian. I have a degree in Brooklyn College art. I was taught to love people, and I really want us to get back together. We've had enough of this. We've had enough. We're all proud of who we are. But first, let us teach each other the best in each other. I grew up in Brooklyn with Dutch, with German, Italian, Irish, black, and the path along my garden was an Indian path, an ancient Indian path. And we will all be following in the same paths, one after another. Eventually, together, let us find joy again in America. And do not curse the president. He grew up not far from my neighborhood, and he, like me, learned that there's a variety of Americans, and you have to work together. God bless America, and God bless everyone here. And let the monuments stand, except the one for Mr. Sims, I must say. That's it. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Okay. Juliet Izzuccelli, Charles Barron, and Henry Reiser, R-I-E-S-E-R. Okay, you're up.
Thank you. My name is Charles Barron. I am an attorney here in New York City. I'm a citizen of the United States of America. I am a citizen of the State of Israel, and for the purposes of this discussion, I am a Jew. There are two monuments or plaques on the lower part of Broadway, north of Morris Street. One of them is to Monsieur Henri Pétain, and the other is to Monsieur Pierre Laval. Now, these names may not mean anything to you, but these names mean a lot to me, because these two individuals in 1940 were the leaders of Vichy France. They took 75,000 innocent men, women, children, and babies and placed them on French trains and deported them to Auschwitz, where all but 3,000 of them were suffocated for no reason except one: because they were Jews. Now, in 1931, there was a ticker tape parade for these two illustrious individuals. Little pieces of paper fluttered through the sky all the way down to Broadway. Little pieces of paper do not breathe. They do not eat. They have no emotions. They cannot live and they cannot die. I say to the members of this committee, when they are evaluating these two issues, whether the plaques stay or go, think of the little children and babies who were inside the gas chambers of Auschwitz because of Mr. Pétain and Mr. Laval, and weigh their memories against the memories of the inanimate objects fluttering down into the streets of New York. We here in New York City have standards, and that standard is, does the presence of that monument in this particular case enrich the city, or does it denigrate this city? a monument to two mass murderers denigrates this city. And I don't care that the circumstances under which those monuments were initially erected was because they had a ticker tape parade. Because if Adolf Hitler had a ticker tape parade in 1929, that would mean that notwithstanding what he did in 1933 to 45, those monuments would stay. And I know that the city of New York would never stand for that. So I say, choose life. Remember the babies in those gas chambers and remove those plaques to Pétain et Laval. Thank you.
Thank you. Juliet?
Good afternoon. My name is Juliet Uccelli. I'm a proud Italian-American and lifelong New Yorker, born and raised in Staten Island, living now in Manhattan. In 1992, which was the 500th anniversary of Columbus's arrival in the Americas, I helped found a group called Italian Americans for a Multicultural United States, or IMUS. We believe that Columbus is not a hero, a role model, or a representative of Italian Americanness, and today, in advocating for the removal of his statue, I would like to briefly say why we thought that, some of which has been alluded to. Reason one, celebrating Columbus insults Native Americans and other peoples of color whose ancestors suffered from Columbus's misdeeds. As a longtime social worker in the public school system and a psychotherapist, I firmly believe that an individual or group cannot attain healthy self-esteem by participating in the degradation of other groups, which is what celebrating Columbus amounts to. This has mostly been detailed already. I would just clarify that Columbus did indeed start the transatlantic slave trade by bringing back to Spain some Native Americans as slaves. Reason number two, as Diane said, Columbus wasn't representing Italy or Italians because there was no Italy. Reason number three, less emphasized, is that the Columbus holiday was actually initiated by rich WASPs who often despised Italian immigrants. Businessmen like Chauncey Depew, who was a principal agent for the Vanderbilt fortune, led the movement for a Columbus holiday in the 1870s and 80s. These businessmen and military leaders did this because essentially they wanted to do what Columbus had done. They wanted to go into other countries and take them over, like Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and Cuba, exploit their resources, build trade routes, and gain markets. Columbus was a symbol for that. It had nothing to do with them with Italian Americans. In fact, Depew is famous for saying the mystery of his origins, referring to Columbus, enhances the charm of his story, because the actual origins of Columbus aren't sure. So this was not about Italian Americans. Now, Italian Americans at this time were called beaten men of beaten races, so much slag in the melting pot. These are quotes from newspapers. Until about 1830, Italians from south of Rome were classified as African or not white, and they did suffer discrimination and lynching. One incident I'll point to is in 1899, 5 Italian shopkeepers lynched in Tallulah, Louisiana, because they were considered too friendly to African Americans. Reason number 4. Just to say quickly, there have always been Italians who opposed the Columbus holiday, including protests in Providence, Rhode Island in the 1930s, because the protesters knew that the parade's organizers were actually supporters of Mussolini, who our parents and grandparents later fought in World War II. And finally, there are other Italian Americans to honor. Pick one, Vito Marcantonio, East Harlem congressman, brought together Italian Americans, African Americans, and Puerto Ricans to fight for housing, jobs, and justice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Henry
Reeser.
Yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Henry Reeser. I'm a native New Yorker. I'm Jewish, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to share my views regarding the future of the equestrian statue honoring General Ulysses S. Grant, located at Bedford and Bergen Streets in Brooklyn. Yes, it's true that Grant's infamous General Order Number 11 to expel all Jews in the area under his command was the most anti-Semitic act ever taken by an American government official. However, we need to look at the context in which it was conceived, the extent to which it was carried out, and most importantly, how Grant felt about his action and the steps he took to atone for it. While there is no contemporary account giving Grant's reason for issuing this directive, we know that he and General William T. Sherman were greatly concerned about the profiteering in which goods were being smuggled into and out of the Confederate States. They felt that this activity was aiding the South and thereby prolonging the war. During this time, General Grant was visited by his father, Jesse Grant, along with several Jewish businessmen who were engaged in the profiteering that the younger Grant was trying to stamp out. The general was furious as he felt that the older Grant was trying to use him as a means of continuing his illegal dealings. On December 17, 1862, Grant issued General Order Number 11 that called for the expulsion of all Jews from the area under his command. The general's action was noted in the New York Times as follows: General Grant has issued an order for all Israelites in his department to leave. Consequently, there has been a general stampede. The number of Jews that were actually expelled from Paducah, Kentucky was 85. Hundreds of letters were sent to President Lincoln protesting this action. And this prompted the president to order the revocation of the order. This was done on January 4th, 1863. During his campaign for the White House in 1868, Grant's wartime expulsion order of Jews received a great deal of attention. He did not deny that Order Number 11 grossly violated core American values. "I do not sustain that order," he wrote humbly. "It would never have been issued if it had not been telegraphed the moment it was penned and without reflection." Once elected, Grant became the first chief executive to offer a cabinet post to a Jew when he asked his longtime friend Joseph Seligman to be his Treasury Secretary. Grant became the first sitting American president to visit a synagogue during services when he attended Aneth Israel Synagogue in Washington, D.C. on Friday, June 9, 1876. The purpose of this visit was for the centennial celebration of American independence.
If you can wrap it up, please.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Grant's presidency proved to be a golden age in U.S. Jewish history. When he died in 1885, he was mourned in synagogues nationwide. Given the above, I request that this commission consider not making any changes in the status of General Grant's statue. To do so would be a disservice to this great American. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you. Michael Madormo, Carol Romeo, and Patrick Waldo is our next three. That's it? Yeah. Okay. You are Michael. Why don't you go ahead? We'll go Michael, then Carol, then Patrick. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. So my name is Michael Madormo. I'm an educator. I'm also part of Showing Up for Racial Justice in New York City. I was going to say I'm a proud Italian American, but that's been so made cliche today by so many of our so-called leaders in the Italian American community. But I am an Italian American who believes that we need to take down the Columbus statue and all monuments to colonization and white supremacy, including J. Marion Sims and Teddy Roosevelt. Personally, my grandparents were poor farmers in Abruzzo, in central Italy, where they suffered devastation of war and poverty, and they immigrated to this country in the hopes of a better life. And I was raised to have a lot of pride in the sacrifices that they made. Rather than a celebration of my family's history and culture, the statues and the day to commemorate Columbus are a symbol of this country's legacy of oppression and the ways in which Italian Americans, like my own family, have been complicit in this white supremacy. With all due respect to elders who have spoke today from from my community, and I wrote down a lot of their quotes, like Phil Foley and Joseph Guaidano and others, who said things like, Italian Americans feel very directly disrespected by this attack on Columbus, or eradicating Columbus is a disrespect to my grandparents. I'd like to ask, who are they speaking for exactly? Because they're not speaking for me, and they're not speaking for Diana and Juliet and Joseph and other Italian Americans who have spoke today. In fact, you know, in my opinion, we have a right to be proud and celebrate our ancestry. But as was said earlier today, and I forgot the gentleman's name, he asked the question, why can pride for one community, Native peoples in this case, supersede the oppression of another, indigenous people? That's not necessary. I do also want to raise up a couple of quotes from Christopher Columbus's own diaries. Again, they've been said a few times, but there's so much whitewashing going on today of who Columbus was and what he did. So, quote, he said, they would make fine servants. With 50 men, we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want. He concluded in his report by asking for a little help from their majesties, and in return, he would bring them from his next voyage as much gold as they need and as many slaves as they ask. That's the words of a mercenary. I don't know how many times we can repeat that, but that's a mercenary, that's not an explorer or a voyager, that's not someone I'm proud of. Also, Professor Sciorra brought up some really important points in his article. I want to raise up one other point in his piece, which was that this push for a monument was pushed from elite northern Italians, rich Italians who wanted to assimilate and use the cover of whiteness to protect the Italian American community. It was not representative of Italians from working class backgrounds, Italians from southern backgrounds. There are many that we could choose from. The Zinn Education Project has created a whole list of Italian Americans who fought for social justice. So if we want to represent the Italian American community, let's go to that list and do so. Otherwise, I vote we represent the indigenous community and the suffering and the resistance of that community. And I'd last just like to say, it is not a choice between Italianness and whiteness. Okay, we can be Italian and disrupt racism and divest from white supremacy and claim our Italian heritage. Thank you.
Thank you. Carol is next.
Hi. My name is Carol Romeo. I'm a registered nurse, and I also have a degree in medieval studies from Columbia University. I'm hearing a lot of history here that I really haven't quite heard before. I've been very fortunate enough to live in 2 different countries and in several different states, one of them being Arizona. And when you live in Arizona, you do study a lot about indigenous people's history, and some of what I'm hearing here doesn't quite match what I studied in Arizona and studied and moving around Mexico, and Mexicans in particular. I don't know if there are any Mexicans in the audience. But if you listen to some of what people are saying now, slavery didn't exist in the Americas before Columbus. And, you know, these diseases, it's true, diseases did come to the Americas, but nobody in 1492 understood immunology. I mean, that's a fairly recent science. Nobody knew what a bacteria was, what a virus was, or how disease spread. So when I hear this about the slaughter of the Native Americans, and you know, you can't have it 2 ways. If you're trying to enslave people to do your work, you don't intentionally kill them. Many of the Native Americans, very unfortunately, were killed by diseases that were not well understood at the time. Again, this is a fairly recent science. And when I hear about no slavery having existed in the Americas, you know, when you live in Arizona, you do study the history of the Aztecs, you study the history of the Apaches, and several Native American tribes. They were not all peaceful. This idea, John Leguizamo has a show right now that will have you believe that all Native Americans from North America to South America were holding hands, skipping through fields, smelling daisies, and we're all getting along with each other. It's blatantly not true. It's blatantly not true. The Aztecs were a fearsome people, so were the Apaches. When the Aztecs took prisoners, they made slaves out of them. The history of the world, the history of civilization has this one negative part to it, and that's slavery. If you go back to study ancient Mesopotamia, look at the hieroglyphs on the Egyptians. They have slaves. It's a very unfortunate part of history that the strong take over the weak. And, you know, isn't it wonderful that we have the mentality now that it's wrong, but somebody needs to go to Africa and tell Boko Haram that it's wrong. And, you know, and I hear these things about Columbus. Oh, he said 9-year-old girls were at a premium. Well, excuse me, 14% of my DNA comes from the Middle East, all due respect to my Muslim brothers. Muhammad's youngest wife was, what, 9 years old when he married her? It was a different mentality. Does it make it right? No, it does not. But Native Americans did make slaves of each other when they were warring against each other. They took their captives. Not slavery the way you know slavery, as far as selling people on a market and all, but they kept them amongst themselves as slaves. I mean, my goodness, you tell the Mexicans that nothing good came out of the Europeans coming here, and you'll put a lot of people out of work today who make their living based on the cultures that happen when the cultures mixed. Okay? Now, I'm Southern Italian, so respect to you. I'm Southern Italian, but I'm also a Navy veteran. My father was a World War II vet. We're Sicilians, yes. We were not considered white, and I used to hear comments when I was a kid about it. But leave the statue alone. Celebrate him as an explorer the way they explored space when Kennedy was president, talking about the exploration of space.
Thank you. Patrick Waldo. By the way, I think it looks like we're going to be here for another half an hour or 25, something. We're getting there, folks, and very want to thank the panel and also thank everybody who stayed. I really do appreciate your being here and listening and participating. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Patrick.
It's okay. Thank you. Thank you all for being here and for holding this panel. My name is Patrick Waldo. I am a licensed New York City tour guide. I'm also a second-year student at the Historic Preservation Program at Pratt Institute. I sit here today on behalf of my Black, Brown, and Indigenous comrades who cannot be here in the middle of a workday because they are working multiple jobs, because they are the longstanding victims of white oppression and the white supremacy that a lot of people in this room have been testifying to honor with the keeping of the Christopher Columbus statue. I want to send a message to the older white men who testified earlier. We're not revoking your membership to the Knights of Columbus by taking down the Christopher Columbus statue. You can still say the name Columbus. We won't take him out of the history books, I promise. Taking down statues does not remove history. It removes commemoration. And statues are put up very deliberately, with very deliberate materials, with stone and durable bronze and durable materials. Their positioning is up high, hundreds of feet or dozens of feet up above the people in a deliberate manner to provide a moral code for citizens to live by. These are not museum pieces that we're looking at. These are ways in which we are meant to live our lives and the things that we are meant to look up to literally. And to celebrate the father of the transatlantic slave trade, to celebrate white supremacy by honoring Christopher Columbus is not the New York that we purport to be. So today I think we'd have to decide if we're a New York of inclusiveness or if we're a New York of Donald Trump. The person running for public advocate earlier offered a compromise. We don't need to compromise with white supremacy. There's no compromising with white supremacy. You know, if we erect a statue to Mayor de Blasio and we discover years later that his affordable housing program was actually created to make real estate developers richer at the expense of communities of color, I hope we'll take his statue down. So we know now more about Christopher Columbus than we did when the statue went up in 1892. Let's use that information and the history that we have now to inform our decisions about the present. So I'll say, take down the Marion Sims statue, take down the racist Teddy Roosevelt statue, and take down the oppressive Christopher Columbus statue. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Just want to say, if you have signed up, your name is in my hand right now on a card. We will call on you. So the next three are Ginevra DiLorenzo, Sam Sherman, and Andrew Ross. Okay, the three of you, and then after that, the next three will be Bobby Dunnington, Maureen Connor, and Dan Matsis. Oh, okay. Okay. And so your name's
Ginevra.
Ginevra and
Sam.
Sam. Is Andrew Ross, I think he's left? Is that what we think? Okay. So then could Bobby Dunnington come up in his place? Thank you very much. So, Ginevra, you're first, yes. Go ahead.
My name is Ginevra DiLorenzo, a lifelong New Yorker. I have worked as a labor and delivery nurse for 8 years, and I'm now studying to be a midwife. I'm here to advocate for the removal of the J. Marion Sims statue. Thank you for giving people the opportunity to voice their opinions. It's come to my attention that J. Marion Sims is referred to as the father of modern gynecology. I've worked in obstetrics for almost a decade, and I've never heard of him. And sometimes the argument is made to keep statues up as a starting point for educational dialogue. I disagree. The discoveries Sims made will remain in textbooks, and the knowledge he gained will not be lost, but the manner in which he gained that knowledge on the backs of enslaved women should not be honored. It is unclear to me how a slave could possibly consent to be experimented on. Dr. Sims operated on black women without anesthesia in a time when there was anesthesia available. While that may sound far away and unimaginable, there is a direct line from Sims thinking that women of color don't feel pain the same way white women did to the current disparities in our healthcare system. These racist beliefs persist, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, and continue to inform our care of people of color. We are working to narrow racial disparities in the maternal mortality, and the city has formed the Maternal Mortality and Morbidity Review Committee as a starting point for much needed change. Many of us in the women's health field welcome this attention, but there is a simple thing we can do right now to show women of color that we value them and their contributions to history, and that is to take down the statue of a man who was lauded for torturing them.
Thank you. Bobby Dunnington? Oh, I'm sorry. No, Sam.
Sam, yeah.
Sam,
Hi.
I've got my cards.
No problem.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Sam Sherman, no relation to General Sherman. And I am an actress, originally from St. Louis, but I live in East Williamsburg now. I've been a New Yorker for about 10 years. And as you can see by my awesome purple t-shirt, I am a proud member of NARAL Pro-Choice America. I'm not gonna lie, I'm one of those activists that about a year ago on a certain gloomy November day went from 0 to 100, but I am still at 100, and I am fighting for reproductive freedom and racial justice and equality, and I don't plan on stopping, so here I am. The statue of J. Marion Sims was brought to my attention when the awesome BYP 100 activist stood in front of it in hospital gowns stained with paint to look like blood. And I saw that monument, and I thought, how is this still a thing? And in New York, it's not our New York. So yes, maybe Sims made some discoveries in the field of gynecology, but he did so on the backs of black women who had no say, who were bought and who were sold, and who were viewed as and treated like less than human, and who were forced to endure a level of pain that is unconscionable. Meanwhile, the white women he treated, they were given anesthesia. So I cannot imagine having my body used as a property to serve the greater good. That is not a cost worth anything, so why is this monument up to honor him? Monuments are not notes of history. Then they would just be in museums and books. But monuments are meant to celebrate and glorify a person. They are meant to be seen by the public every day and respected and enjoyed. So the only thing keeping this statue up does is it solidifies white supremacy. It validates a world in which we were not all created equal, and it excuses racism. So let's take it down. We're not erasing history. We are not erasing Sims. But let's just put Sims in a museum, put him in books, teach future generations the truth of our history, but take it down immediately. No one should be forced to look at it and celebrate a torturer every day. That is not our New York. So how about instead, we raise some funds and we put up Anarcha, Lucy, Betsy, and the others unnamed. I want to look and celebrate the mothers of gynecology, and I want to raise them up, and I want to honor their lives stolen from them. That is our New York. Let's just read about Sims in history books, because he's a part of history, but he is not our hero.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bobby Dunnington. If you could hand over the mic.
It's Babby Dunnington, and I'm a student of landscape architecture at City College. And I feel like from a design perspective, the statue of Columbus, of J. Marion Sims, of Teddy Roosevelt, their removal is, I think, something that New York could really do to be a model city for future generations. And just the design of having a removal of these symbols of oppression that were made by stakeholders in white supremacy, I think that would just open up a huge amount of imagination for like how we can live our lives. Monuments are, they're monuments, and they reflect the values of a city. Are those our values? Are those things that we want to live up to? I feel like by having those, by not taking them down, we're making a very clear and strong statement about where we stand in this society today. We all know that Columbus led to a society that we live in today that was built on slavery, and the admitting that this is wrong is opening the door for change and opening the door for maybe commemoration of Native people that lived here. This could be a kind of a radical reimagining of how we live in society today and how we structure our systems. So that's all.
Thank you. The next three are Maureen Connor, Dan Matsis, and Sammy Disu. Okay, you are first, Maureen Connor.
Thank you. I'm Maureen Connor, and I'm an artist and professor emerita from Queens College, CUNY. I'd like to thank the committee, Tom and Darren, and the rest of you for your patience, especially today. I'm sure you're hungry now. I see you nibbling. So I'm going to be quick. I am here in solidarity with Marina Ortiz, East Harlem Preservation, Black Youth 100, and the Coalition to Remove the Monument to Dr. J. Marion Sims. If public monuments and memorials are meant to function as repositories for values, which we've heard a lot about today, values, whose values are perpetuated and whose are ignored through the display of statues that celebrate problematic figures? Although Marina Ortiz, the director of East Harlem Preservation, has been working tirelessly toward the removal of the statue of Dr. Sims since 2007, reconsideration of such monuments only became part of the national conversation after the fatal shooting of 9 people inside the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina in June 2015. Most significantly, the outcry pressured South Carolina's governor to remove the Confederate flag flown over the State House since 1961. The focus on the State House also called attention to the many monuments that surrounded it, built post-Reconstruction in an effort by white supremacists to reclaim power in the South. Journalists began to report on the identity of the supremacist figures these monuments represented, questioning why they still held places of honor. Sims also has one of these monuments by the South Carolina State House. Sims' surgeries were to repair vaginal fistulas, tears in the vaginal wall causing the contents of the bladder or colon to leak into the vagina. Resulting from obstructed childbirth or sometimes sexual violence, fistulas are common where there is limited access to prenatal care. When the owners of local plantations asked Sims to treat their enslaved women suffering from fistulas, did they do so because they wanted them to experience less pain? Certainly not. In fact, one of the primary functions of young enslaved women in addition to their physical labor, was reproduction. That is, to give birth to the workforce that would serve as the next generation of enslaved people. Vaginal fistulas made pregnancy and childbirth almost impossible. Does a man whose medical advances were based on the exploitation of enslaved women and in the antebellum South, followed by a similar, oh dear, okay. Can I just go quickly?
Yes, if you could wrap it up, thank you.
What?
Just go ahead. You have a couple more moments, but please wrap it up, yes.
Okay. I'd like to end with a quote excuse me, from Terry Capsalis, writer, anthropologist, and gynecological model from her book, Public Privates. If gynecology is premised on such practices as Sims, might the entire specialty be reconsidered in this light? If it were, we would surely find that the racism and misogyny underlying Sims practices still flourish in contemporary medicine and its applications, particularly with regard to women and their reproductive organs. Thank you.
Thank you. Dan Matsis, please.
My name is Demosthenes Matsis.
Can you bring right up to your...
My name is Demosthenes Matsis, or Dan Matsis, and I'm of Greek descent. And I want to testify in favor of maintaining the Columbus statue. Columbus was born in 1451. 2 years later, Constantinople was sacked by the terrible Turk and the Arab hordes. Greece and Central Europe fell into a dark age. Europe was terrified by the prospects. Columbus was also terrified because he could no longer ply his trade as a carter or fashioner of fabrics. And he went off to Barcelona and came up with the idea of reaching Indonesia by way of going west. And he pleaded with Isabel and Ferdinand of Spain to provide the ships. His next task was to make it across the Atlantic Ocean and not suffer a mutiny. There was a halfway point where their supplies would not take them any further. But he continued on courageously. And he landed in the Bahamas, fortunately. And for this, the man is next to Alexander the Great, is probably one of the most heralded persons we should honor. As far as how he administered his office after 1492, he didn't have any malicious intent. Ferdinand and Isabella needed their bounty, and he may have used some improper techniques to provide that. Ultimately, he was not satisfactory to Ferdinand and Isabella, and they removed him and put in another governor. So I cannot see why we cannot honor this man. He's an Italian Genoese that had the courage to make the trip, a dangerous trip. He is the great navigator of the unknown to me.
Thank you. Sami Disu.
Dear members of the Advisory Commission, my name is Sami Disu. I teach African American history at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. I'm an activist. I'm a member of Citizen Action of New York, amongst several others. I would like to thank the Commission, first of all, for doing what it could do to ensure as much community participation, especially given the timing of these hearings in the morning, but I think you're doing a pretty good job so far. Let me begin by agreeing with many that removing long-standing symbols of white supremacy in New York City should only be the beginning. After all, how could the removal of a couple of statues undo the systemic issues of structural inequities, which has been the experience of blacks and now brown in New York or anywhere in America? But these kinds of open conversations can be helpful. The Taino peoples who welcomed the lost Christopher Columbus onto their island in the late 15th century still live on to this day. And some of their descendants must pass by the prominently situated Columbus statue, which says nothing about the decimation of their civilization. Not one word. What kind of trauma and disrespect are we subjecting them to? And what about the millions of blacks who were stolen from Africa to toil in the Caribbean and what we call present-day United States of America? What kind of damage are we subjecting their descendants to when we hold Columbus high upon that pedestal in Manhattan, without a single word to their internalized and accepted sufferings? Have you heard of post-traumatic slave syndrome? You don't need to have learned about it as a black person. We're all recovering. This issue about the continued maintenance of the Columbus statue and several others like it all around the city will eventually be settled with its removal, especially if much is not done in our time, in our contemporary society. They will eventually come down because they were erected upon lies of the supremacy of some without any regard for the inputs of black and brown peoples who now have a voice and want them crashing down. Based on how I feel as a recent black immigrant who calls New York City home, I can only tell you what I think your charge is. Your charge is to be effective in finding significant and creative ways to set the record right. And the extent to which you are effective will determine whether these painful, visually visceral reminders come tumbling down in my generation or the next. Help us add our voices to this conversation because we were completely left out by processes like this very one many, many years ago. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we are on our second to the last panel. Oh, okay. Vajra Kilgour, Diane Cohen. What's that? Christina Piertovska. And then there'll be one more after that. Okay. And again, thank everybody for staying and listening politely. Thank you. Okay. If you could pass the mic down to this end. Thank you very much. Okay, you're on.
Thank you. My name is Vajra Kilgour.
Hold on a second. I'm sorry. If you could stop. If you can give the testimony to Nadia, and she's going to copy it and give us to the, yes. Okay. Oh, you did? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, let's get started. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. I've lived in New York for a very long time. My background is, I like to describe as tasteful American blend. I think probably a lot of people in this room belong to that same ethnic group in various blends. And I'm not proud of it because, as George Carlin would say, I did nothing to get it, right? So I've heard some white-splaining, and I've heard some whataboutism, and I've heard some very, very well-informed and cogent arguments in favor of taking down these monuments. I think J. Marion Sims is kind of a slam dunk at this point. The statue of Teddy Roosevelt with subservient human beings on either side of him is an insult to every human being on the planet, including me. And the statue of Columbus, okay, now we get into vexed territory because the question is, what are we enshrining? What are we enshrining with any of these statues, actually? A lot of people have said, and I agree with them, we are enshrining white supremacy, but we are enshrining, and not only that, but as one person pointed out, it's not only about enshrining white supremacy and actually literally whitewashing history by saying that people are heroes who in fact were criminals. It's also the erasure of the history of peoples of color. So those two things go together. And we need to make some amends here. We need to make this right. We need to make this right. I don't want to cringe with shame Every time I walk by the Museum of Natural History, I don't want to feel as if I have to cover my eyes every time I walk past 105th Street and Central Park. And I don't want to feel personally assaulted every time I go by Columbus Circle. I think that, you know, there are in fact many, I'm not sure if I want statues of people at all. I think that we need to be our own heroes, although it would be nice to see, you know, good art. But, wait, I'm losing my thread here. Oh, right, okay. So there are many people to be proud of in all of our ancestries. And in some of my sort of mixed ancestries, there were bigots, and then there were the people they were bigoted against, right? But if we are enshrining, we want to be included in the group that does the oppressing, I don't think that's healthy. And if we're enshrining oppression on any level, it's not healthy for any of us. It is not healthy for a single human being. And, you know, not only the ones who have come and said, you know, this is an insult to my ancestors, it's an insult to humanity. And they need to go. And they don't need white-splaining, left there with white-splaining.
Thank you. Okay, Diane.
Okay, I don't know how this works. Okay, my name is Diane Cohen, and I am a native New Yorker, although I've lived years in California and other places. The first thing I want to address is that I don't know if the panel has been hearing the hissing going on there. I'm finding offense with that, because I didn't come here to present. I don't have a dog in the fight. I came here and I got educated. I did not know about the statue of Sims. I've learned something today. That's, you know, that's a good thing, because I didn't come with the presentation. And to your point about your native, black and brown friends who you know, who are different than other people here because they couldn't be here. You don't know what I've given up to be here today because I wanted to be here today. So you can't make those assumptions, because I have a problem with it. I don't like the hissing, and I'm saying that because it almost polarizes me to say that anything you are for who hiss, I am against, because this is supposed to be a forum. I'm here more to talk about the destabilization of the times. See, with this camera, I've made the statues that are presently in front of every magazine. I've shot Anthony Weiner, not shot, photographed. Kim Kardashian, now should she be relegated to these like a hero to some people? She's a hero, Kim Kardashian, and these other people. Now I've been watching, as we all have, in the last month, Spacey's fallen. Who is it? Charlie Rose the other day. I mean, you just sit back. A friend of mine said he just gets his popcorn and just watches it. You don't have to watch reality TV anymore. I mean, I think it's much more complicated than we see. These are very, very difficult times. We all have a dark or shadow part. We're finding out all our supposed heroes, Bill Cosby to many, have fallen, and I don't have an answer. I don't have a presentation. But it's a very, very upsetting time to me to see everything be destabilized. And as soon as they started talking about the statues, I think that just the fact that there's a forum here is a very important thing, that we're discussing it. I don't know what I want to be done with everything that's up there. Maybe we have to do a memorial to do it and then a plaque. I don't have the answers. I do know that it would be a real mistake to a lot of people who maybe are like me to just have everything knocked down. I mean, every day I'm watching the folk heroes, whatever you want to call them, the celebrities. That's my culture. That's what I've been in, being knocked down, and it's very upsetting. And if this city, which I've lived in most of my life, will remain a place of safety, of stability, I think it would be a real mistake. I'll finish up. I think it would be a real mistake just to knock things down. I think we should think about adding things and enhancing new people, new statues, But I am one for not pulling things down, because everything is being pulled down on a daily basis, and I think this society is getting very destabilized.
Okay, thank you. Please,
Oh,
let's,
yeah,
no, please.
That's
please,
what I'm talking about. Do it
No, no.
louder so they can hear that.
People,
'Cause
folks,
whatever
we've
you're
gotten to
for,
please-
whatever the hissing is for, I
Hold
will
on,
be against.
Diane, you finished
I'm just
your-
saying,
Thank
did
you,
you
thank
know
you.
they were hissing? It's funny.
I have been trying to keep people to
It's-
listen, and we've done a very
Whatever
good job,
they're
and I
for,
want to
I'm
thank
against.
everybody. We are very close to the end. Let's get to the end with civility, and thank you. Christina, you are next.
My name is Krystyna Piórkowska, and I'm speaking in the name of the parish of...
Can you get closer to your yes? There
Sorry.
you go. Thank you.
My name is Krystyna Piórkowska, and I'm speaking in the name of the parish of St. Stanislaus in Manhattan, as well as the Piłsudski Institute in Brooklyn. I'd like to speak to you about a country that once was and then disappeared, partitioned as it was by three mighty empires, which treated it and its citizens in a colonial fashion. Education was limited. In one of the areas, children could only attend 3 grades of school, as it was considered sufficient. The areas of art and culture were also treated as being essentially unnecessary. And those individuals who wanted to paint, sculpt, perform, or sing on stage had to leave, much as scholars did, to other lands where they became labeled as being those nationals. Those who wanted to struggle for freedom were either sent to prisons or, if lucky, into exile. The average citizens of this country who emigrated to the United States were classified as being of a different nationality than their own, and they were referred to by various demeaning terms. Why do I speak of these people? Because many of them did travel and work to New York, and in some cases their efforts were recognized, but only fleetingly. I raise this issue because the disregard of a nation in a multicultural city like New York is as demeaning and destructive to the psyche of a child or adult as viewing what can be considered a demeaning sculpture. Removing a sculpture or a plaque is destructive by its absence. If you wonder what nation I'm referring to, it is Poland. And over the past several decades, the Parks Department in the city of New York have, I dare say, actively removed or attempted to remove the signs and symbols of this nation. So, Ignacy Jan Paderewski, pianist and megastar, diplomat and prime minister of the recreated nation of Poland, worked to help the Washington Arch at Washington Square Park. Yet not only did the city of New York not honor him, but when the tree that was planted by the Polish community in 1941 died, it was removed together with the 2 plaques which were present. That's next to Sam Cox's statue in Tompkins Square Park. There were no plans to replant it. It took a year of effort to replant the red oak, but for the past 18 months, the community has been stymied in its effort to have the plaques replaced, with claims being made that there were no plaques there. Another person, Maria Skłodowska, the prime example of a female who fought against all odds to garner the studies that she wanted and could not get in her occupied land, has been effectively erased from existence in the city of New York.
So can you just wrap it up? Go ahead.
3 sentences.
Okay, very good.
She's known to you probably as Marie Curie, because when she lived in France, she was forced to change her name. And the French decided, despite her insistence on using a hyphenated name, Skłodowska-Curie, to call her only Curie. So I ask you to walk down to City Hall Park and look at the plinth that remains. But the tree that was planted there was removed because it wasn't a Native American species. And a lonely plinth stands abjectly. And a woman who means very much to the Polish community is a great example of STEM studies for girls has no place in New York.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. One more pair. Oh, we have 3, okay. It is. This is it. Stacy Chubb, Kamau Ware, and Tamar Rothenberg. Okay. And I'm sorry, you are? Stacy. And we have Kamau. Is Tamar here? If not, it's the two of you. Okay, go ahead, Stacy.
Hi, thank you. Although I am a Jewish bisexual woman of a certain age and have experienced hurdles and roadblocks, I did not come here representing any of that today. I never actually even heard of the two statues of French men before today. I'm also a person of privilege, and with that comes the responsibility to speak up. I'll share with you what I wrote after the first half. During lunch, I sent a post on Facebook. Wow, the failure of our school system and the subsequent ignorance of historical facts, the bold display of privilege and how it distorts your worldview, the lack of empathy and compassion, the inability to even momentarily remove yourself from your insular echo chamber of false narratives, the shifting of focus from the truly oppressed, enslaved, experimented on and murdered to a ridiculous claim of assault on heritage and tradition, all of that was on display today, and it truly boggles my mind. Although I like to believe I'm this wasn't all on Facebook. Although I like to believe I'm relatively a well-educated New Yorker, I learned more about this issue today in a few hours here than in all my time in school. I heard names of people of color to be honored that I'd never heard before. The passionate Latina woman is an example of a bigger problem. I don't fault her for supporting her mother's wishes to honor her hero. Who doesn't want to honor a hero? The problem is it's honoring a myth. It would not be whitewashing or erasing history to move these statues. It would be moving the burden of education to our educators, the professionals, to have interactive discussions and conversations with our children, and the ability to update as new information is discovered. Leaving statues in place is not only traumatic to those forced to pay and view them, it feels like trying to teach complex history through sound bites and tweets. You can't. You will not find a statue erected to celebrate any medical breakthroughs that may have come from experiments on Jews, gays, Romani, disabled, performed by Dr. Yosef Mengele during the Holocaust. Yet there's a statue to Dr. Sims. We have a memorial. Imagine being a woman of color walking by a statue of Sims in Central Park. Imagine being me now, a Jew, trying to explain to my daughter why there were two statues honoring French men responsible for sending children to the death chambers. Just as you will find no swastikas, no public memorials of perpetuators of ethnic cleansing, instead relying on education to ensure events like the Holocaust never happen again in Germany, we too can do the same. I do stand in support of the removal of these offensive monuments from our streets, parks, and plazas.
Okay, and we will wrap it up with one more, is Kamau Ware.
Didn't know I was going last. Look at that. Well, I want to thank you for the commission. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be to speak and also to be heard. My name is Kamau Ware. I'm the founder of a project called Black Gotham Experience, and we celebrate the impact of the African diaspora in New York City through walking tours. And through giving walking tours, I've had to learn a lot about what's going on in a public square that often isn't talked about. And I just want to like pause for a moment and just think about how special this city is and how special the amount of stories that are present, that are spoken of and not spoken of, and just encourage us to see this as an opportunity to think about telling these stories is a way of just building a broader understanding of who we are as people, as citizens, and as souls. And one thing that I think about just from hearing the different people speak today is how much this history connects. And I think that I am more an advocate, first and foremost, of making sure certain things are added to the conversation. There are people from Angola and the Congo that came to this island in the 1620s who built things that still stand today, such as Broadway, completing Fort Amsterdam, building Wall Street. One of the first ethnic neighborhoods of New York City would be Land of the Blacks between East and West Village that was in existence prior to New York City. And I think that these are opportunities to tell the story versus ignoring it, because these are things that are well researched. The archives back it up. There's plenty of books about it and courses about it. But if you walk around certain places in New York, those those stories just are not being told. And I think that it's a chance for us to better understand who we are, because we come from this past that really has a lot of Black history that just isn't acknowledged. And so the building of these different places like Broadway and this Black community is one example, but also I think it's important to understand that when you have a city like New York, which is very critical in the transcontinental slave trade run by the British, is that you have people who are resisting slavery before Patrick Henry is born, before people are 9 years old, 35 years old, who are living by the mantra freedom or death, who don't have any recognition that they fought against the British to end tyranny in a very real way before there was a debate about taxes. And I think telling that full story is an important part of anybody walking the streets of New York to understand how deep the history goes. And if we value freedom, we should value people who are Black who fought against freedom too before it became sexy in the 1770s and 60s. And last and not least, I want to mention that I found out about Dr. Sims when I was in London in October, and my ears went up because people, I'm a nerd, I know a lot of history, but I'm in London and someone's talking about the Sims statue and just happens to mention, oh, and by the way, it's in Central Park. And I was like, word? And so when I came back and I began to dig into it, I just want to end by associate myself with everybody calling for his removal, because that's sexism and racism put together.
Thank you. All right. I really want to thank everybody. I think that is extremely important. I guess you could clap now for everybody. And all right, thank you. I want to say, that I spoke to the commissioners at the intermission. They were fascinated with everybody's discussion. I really want to thank everybody. If there are other folks that couldn't make it, we still have two more. We got Staten Island and the Bronx coming up. And if I may say, happy Thanksgiving. That's non-denominational. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Makes a difference.